Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. I just thought I'd play the intro without the music. It keeps getting slapped by copyright, which is really strange. And so I just thought I'd try it without the music, see what it's like. I've just got to get some uncopyrighted music that I like and put it over the top there. So what we're going to do today, we are going to go through the debate, the great 1 John 5:7 debate, the Cumulonian, with Mike Hollner and Mike Ferrando. So this was done on Standing for Truth. It was streamed 3 days ago, so I was able to listen to that live. I wasn't able to look at all the slides and everything like that. But one thing I want to bring up is, now I'm just going to reduce the screen a little bit. How do I get rid of that? That's a good question. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I actually invited Mike Hollner and Mike Ferrando to come on the program live, and so they're going to be here live. So that's going to be Friday, May the 3rd. So that's this Friday. So at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and so they're going to go through their findings on 1 John 5:7. And these guys have been very helpful for me over the years. Specifically, Mike Ferrando, I've had quite a lot of interaction with him. He has written the book, The Witness of God is Greater. Now, if you don't have that book, it's usually he is constantly updating that. And if you jump on his email list, he'll send you fresh copies of that. In a sense where it just comes out in a PDF, and he might add another 2 pages here and there, and it's very helpful. And so I've shared information with him. He's shared information with me, and he's a great researcher. When I was doing my Revelation 16:5 material, he was sending me a lot of information about that, so it was very helpful. And I almost every week I was looking forward to his findings, and he would send me things from the early church witnesses, early church writings that would say things about 1 John 5:7 or have allusions to Jehovah and things like that. And if you know about those issues, that's been my forte. And so, but one thing that I did do while COVID was happening, for about maybe 3 months, I focused on the Cumulonian. And so I did quite a bit of work with Stephen Avery, and we sort of bounced off each other and gave each other ideas of what to do. And he was focusing on Grantley MacDonald's material. So Grantley MacDonald had, he had done a dissertation, which was, I think it was called Raising the Ghost of Arius. And in it, it had quite a lot of really good information about the comma, but he was constantly saying, he'd sort of get to the end and go, see, that's why we shouldn't include it. And it's like, I would get to the end and go, that's why we should include it. Obviously, if you're talking about the Cumulonian being in manuscripts that are like 8th century, 9th century, 10th, and going through the centuries, well, obviously the church was using it back then, but their whole premise is it has to come from a Latin text. That's what James Snapp went with. Then it has to come from a marginal note, and then it has to be squeezed back into the Greek, And so usually people just avoid all of that, and they just go, well, Erasmus just put it in there, because someone threatened him, or someone made a rash promise, and they had to put it in, because there was no other choice. He promised that he'd put it in, and so someone just made a manuscript for him, and it was wet straight off the pen, straight out of the scriptorium, and they put it in front of him, and he's like, okay, I'll have to do this. This is the sort of conspiracy nuttery that goes with the 1 John 5:7 8 debate. So I did put 1 John 5:7 to 8 because the Cumulonian does include verse 8. Now, when I first started my Textus Receptus website, I actually put everything under 1 John 5:7, And well, I was a few years into it, and I was like, actually, it includes verse 8. And so I had to make a completely separate page just called the Comma Johannium. And I've tried to sort of put information, relevant information on all these pages, but it can be quite hard because there's so much information that it's not like, we're just scraping for a few things here and there. When I spent 3 months looking into the comma, I was shocked that there was so much information. And I guess in a way, like I knew that there was, enough information there to satisfy my own personal convictions. I'm like, yeah, sure, it has to be in there. But after doing those studies, I was not only convinced like 100-fold, but also I developed the ability to be able to show others why the comma's in there. So that's when I started to do a few debates and things like that. So we've got a few comments here. So Stephen Hayes is in the house. Hey, Nick, glad to see you doing a review of the debate. I did watch it and I found Snapp's performance disturbing. He was very aggressive, but he didn't really interact with the arguments. Yeah, I found that as well. I do understand in these debates that they do have to do their opening statements, and a lot of these things are sort of prepared earlier. But it would have been nice for him to sort of go, well, let's look at the Latin evidence then, because, 95% of the Latin manuscripts have the comma. And so that's huge evidence. But he's just like, no, because we say that it came from a Latin commentary that just made this up, because we think it came from a Latin commentary of verse 8, then it doesn't matter. If it's in the Latin, well, that doesn't matter. We just scrub it out. But it's quite an amazing thing to watch. Stephen Hayes says, Snapp kept quoting Proverbs 35 and 6, connecting it with Revelation 21:8, basically suggesting we're going to hell. Yeah, and like usually it's King James guys and TR guys who, get we get rocks thrown at us for mentioning, Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 and 19. Don't add or subtract from the word of God. But see, the thing is, like, one of the things is with James Snapp Jr., like with everyone in the field of textual criticism, and, I'm just a layman, just sort of, fudging along here. But with everyone in the field of textual criticism, they do look to James Snapp and admire when he is on our side, because he is quite thorough. But then there can be times when he just has these huge, massive gaps in his logic and gaps in his understanding. And so it's times like this when we're looking at the comma that he just doesn't seem to be logical, doesn't seem to want to interact with the argumentation. He sort of has an answer and says, well, I've answered it, look at my website sort of thing, where he hasn't really answered it. What he's done, he's gone to a guy called Barry Hofstetter. And unfortunately, Barry passed away, I think it was last year or the year before. And so he's a scholar. He knows Latin, teaches Latin, or taught Latin. But at the end of the day, we've gone to scholars who would make these guys look like, say scholars who are actual, like, legendary scholars. Like if you could be the best scholar that's ever been in a human, I think Georgios Babiniotis would be one of the greatest Greek scholars ever. And so when you compare him to Barry Hofstetter, you're sort of looking at someone who's, probably 95%, as far as you can go, as far as a human can go with understanding the Greek language. And Barry Hofstetter was sort of like, 5-6%, and these guys, when I mentioned Georgios Babiniotis to them, to James Snapp and to Mike Ferrando, they just went, who's this guy? What's this guy got to do with anything? And it's like, well, he's been brought up with the Greek language. And they're just like, oh, what, modern Greek? I'm like, well, no, he's written 6 dictionaries, including etymological dictionaries. He's written 200 books on the Greek language, including books on different, ancient Greek, Koine Greek, all types of Greek. And so who is this guy? Probably the most legendary Greek linguist alive, and one of the most legendary Greek linguists ever. And so when I personally contacted him and emailed him and asked him about the comma, he said that what we were saying about the comma was true and correct. He's on our side. Isn't it good to have scholars who are not affected by the academy? Because what people were saying was, well, does he know about all the manuscript evidence? And it's sort of like, well, I didn't ask him about manuscript evidence. I asked him about a solecism, and asked him specifically if the concepts that a guy called Eugenius Vulgaris taught were true. And so he said not only are they true, but there is an extra added layer of interest, which is the syntactic parallelism, which he brought up. And so this has caused a lot of us to be studying even more, because this guy's it's like talking to Einstein sort of thing when it comes to the Greek language. And so we're like, okay, well, we better figure this stuff out. And so we've been looking at it and thinking about it, and it's broadened our mind, and it's also made us appreciate a lot of the authors who came after Eugenius Vulgaris. Some of these guys were in Germany, some of these guys were in England, and they were constantly bringing up the grammatical issue. And so this is very strong internal evidence in the Greek. But unfortunately, James Snapp, he had already written his article with Barry Hofstadter before this information came out about the grammatical issues. And I think Stephen Avery's clearly debunked the Hofstadter concepts. Hofstadter basically said, well, there's other solecisms around the place. And he talked about all these other places which weren't equivalent to 1 John 5:7. It didn't involve the names of God. It didn't involve like a syntactic parallelism. It didn't involve a lot of things. And so Stephen Avery's pointed that out. And we've gone through some of those things in videos probably, 2, 3, 4 years ago. But we are going to go through this video, and we're going to look at all this. And so I'm glad that I've got Mike Hollner and Mike Ferrando coming on the program. So this will be Friday for all the audience in the United States. And when I look at YouTube, it does seem like 90% of the audience is in the United States. There's a few in England, there's a few here in Australia, but most people are in the US. So that's why I advertise it in Eastern Standard Time. So it's basically going to be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is basically Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock. New York time, I guess you'd call, or Washington time. I'm not sure of all the little details there, whether there's daylight savings and all this sort of stuff, but hopefully when you click on YouTube, you should be able to just look at the countdown in your area, and it'll show you. So we've got quite a lot of stuff coming up. I'm just trying to get rid. There we go. I'm just trying to get rid of that picture. I might enlarge in this page so we can have a bit of a look at what we got coming up. So obviously this is what we got here, part 1, examining the Hollner Ferrando versus Snapp debate on 1 John 5:7-8 by Nick Sayers. So I'm just going to go through that. So I've got part 1 now. I estimate it will probably be 6, 7, 8 parts, but that'll take quite a few weeks to do. But I think it'll be good to go through these slides and go through this material. So the next couple of weeks are going to be really focused on 1 John 5:7, and we're going to really sort of nail some of these things home. And then, so what we've got coming this Friday. So it's Saturday, very early Saturday morning for me, but it's Friday in the US. The live interview with Mike Hollner and Mike Ferrando on 1 John 5:7-8. So I've got explosive information with a picture of a nuclear bomb going off in the background. So that should be pretty cool. So I might click on that and we can, check that out. So live, it says live in 8 days. Actually, that's a mistake. I just uploaded that. So I better change that, because I'll change that while the debate's going on. So what we do have in 8 days, I think it's because I copied the same information to Phil Stringer, This is live in 8 days. We've got Phil Stringer. So if you don't know who Phil Stringer is, Phil Stringer is one of the main key characters behind the Dean Burgon Society. What's it? The King James. I should know this. The King James Council. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, which is really sad. But Phil Stringer's prolific in writing about the King James issues, the Textus Receptus. He is an active, evangelist going around preaching in churches, and and I noticed on his Facebook today, he said, he gets accused of just focusing on the King James issues, and it's like, look, some people, if they go out and play golf, some people go on, the King James Research Council. Thanks for that, Hannah. And so he's one of the main guys behind that. He was one of the main guys behind the Center for the Research of New Testament Manuscripts or something like that, which is sort of like, it was like a majority text TR group mixed together who were collecting manuscripts that basically sort of backed up the majority text. But I think that sort of fizzled out. So some of these groups they get together and then they have a bit of a fallout or whatever. And I think with D.A. Waite's group, the Dean Burgon Society, it can be quite a strict vetting process to be part of that. Like if you were ever married and divorced before you become a Christian, you would never be part of the ministry or anything like that with him, where some people don't see it that way. They say, when whatever happened, you could be Adolf Hitler and then become a Christian. It's a blank slate, when you come into the kingdom. And so, so there can be some people who sort of have been on the outer with the Dean Burgon Society and things like that. But I don't want to go into all those details, but we're going to be interviewing Phil Stringer. He has a very interesting video on King James and how he's not a homosexual and how he used to think he was, but then he researched it and came to the conclusion that it's complete slander. So this is in 8 days. So we've got Phil Stringer. That's going to be really awesome to go through and interview him, like I've interviewed Jeff Riddle and Will Kinney and Peter Van Cleek and Joseph Armstrong. I've really enjoyed doing those videos. And I think, too, a lot of people can be quite surprised at the similarities. And I know sometimes, like James White, he'll jump on his program and go, all these people are just the same, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the end of the day, we do have an affinity towards the King James, regardless of, even if you are a TR person, there are the 20 little tiny sprinklings that the King James did choose above Beza's readings. And so, but usually that's blown right out of proportion. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same text. We're talking about the same type of issues. We're defending the same verses. We're exposing the omissions. And so a lot of the time we're sort of basically just coming from different perspectives, because we all grew, we all become Christian. Like you might have become a Christian and gone down to your local church, and that marinates you into their teaching, their doctrine, their point of view, and your worldview, your presuppositions. That can affect everything. And so sometimes people are coming from a Baptist perspective or a Calvinist perspective, or like say Stephen Avery, he got born again in a he started to go to a modalist church that was anti-Trinity, and then he moved away from it and started getting into all the Trinity stuff, but then was like, hang on, some of this Trinity stuff can go overboard and you can go over this other way and get too creedal and all this. So he's sort of trying to find a middle place, and it's like, well, man, it wherever people have just gone to church, that can affect you for life. If you meet someone who's grown up a Seventh-day Adventist, they're, like who's the guy in Australia? It's I can't remember his name, but he's prolific in writing about the Textus Receptus. He's doing his own commentary on the Textus Receptus, and his material is amazing. But he grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist, but now he's an Anglican. And so it's quite interesting. We're all coming from different backgrounds, but it's great to just interview people and find out exactly where they come from, what their issues are. And a lot of the time they're just coming up with, look, I follow the Textus Receptus and I read the King James. And so it's, when you break it down to those simple concepts, we do have a lot of similarities. So then we've got Kirk de Vitro. Now, if you don't know who Kirk de Vitro is, he is absolutely legendary in the field of defense of the Textus Receptus and the King James Version. Kirk is one of those guys who, like, say, David Daniels, he interviewed him, and he was in the audience when they announced about the New King James Version, saying it was a bridge version to other modern Bibles and all this sort of stuff. So he's got some very interesting things to say. I've contacted him every now and then and just got his scholarly opinion on things like Scrivener and others. And so he has been part of the Dean Burgon Society for many, many years. So, and a lot of these guys probably, up until, 10 years ago, I used to listen to these guys quite frequently. Kirk de Vitro, he was like, look, I'm preaching. He was almost preaching every day of the week still. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And so I would really love to get D.A. Waite on the program. I'm not sure, because I know he's like over 90, but it would be great. I actually texted Joseph Chambers the other day. So I know Joseph Chambers personally. I've been able to testify in his church, and Gavin McGrath is the Aussie guy who I was talking about, the Textus Receptus guy who's doing the commentary. So he used to be a Seventh-day Adventist, and so now he's an Anglican. But yeah, so I'm sort of going all over the place here because we've got so much happening, but I don't want to just drag this on forever. So that's live in 15 days, so the 11th of May. And we also have some other people lined up, which I won't announce until we've sort of absolutely solidified a date. But we've got quite a few people wanting to do some interviews. And I guess this is all leading up to me doing my own debates. And so if you guys out there know someone who's a contra and they want to do a debate about the King James, and it can be any part of the King James. Some people might want to debate on 1 John 5:7. Some people mightn't know that much about that. So I prefer people debate on their strengths rather than just doing something that is like, oh, you've got a month to prepare and you just sort of, trying to fudge your way through it. Like someone like James Snapp Jr., he's done a lot of information, and some of it is against the King James TR position. But, James has had a stroke last year, and I think it would have been good for him to choose another partner, because really in the debate he was just sort of repeating, himself, and he didn't really deal with the Latin issues. So, but anyway, I'm going to go through some of these comments, and then we will get on with this video. And so, and I did notice that Will Kinney did a live interview on the Standing for Truth Ministries. It was the ending of Mark and the woman caught in adultery, authentic or not. So that was yesterday. I was able to listen to that live. So that was really good. So I'll just get this video. Whoops. So I'm right at the end of that. So what I will do is I'll go through some of these comments. So Jimmy Coates says, now I'm uploading a video. It's taking up all my bandwidth. So there we go. Yes, Snapp appeared to be more interested with engaging the comments section. Yeah, like one time I was on Josh Gibbs' program, and me and Stephen Avery were going to talk about Codex Sinaiticus. And I had a lot of stuff written out, and I did a lot of research into it. And I was sort of coming from a different angle, where Stephen Avery was talking about Simonides and a lot of the details there, where I was sort of coming from the perspective of looking at other forgeries, archaic mark, because I didn't want to just repeat what Stephen Avery said. But then James Snapp Jr. sort of jumped into the chat and started saying things and asking questions. And so Josh Gibbs was talking about that. Then he invited him on the live program. And then basically it was him and Stephen Avery just yelling at each other. And I just sat there for like an hour and a half just going, well, this is fun. And because I had a lot to say and I couldn't say any of it. And then they actually organised for a full debate on that issue between those two. But I sort of felt like he'd come on and not hijacked it, because he did get invited on there. But I just was like, I wish that we were able to just present our case calmly and all the rest of it without yelling about, Simonides and dates and things like that. He holds to the Greek. If not in the Greek, it doesn't factor in. Yeah, but I think one thing that he doesn't do is look at documents that have been translated from the Greek and say, well, that's obviously got Greek behind it. So we look at the King James and we go, well, there's a Greek text behind it. Even Scrivener and the Westcott and Hort guys, they recognize if you were to go through the King James and get, say, Beza's text, you could find out the tiny little differences that they made, and you can amend. Scrivener amended his text by doing that in those 20 places. The 170 other places are pretty much, redundant phonetic places and untranslatable differences. But that's what they did. And so there are people like Manetti, who did 70 years before Erasmus. Manetti did a Latin translation based on Greek manuscripts. So he was the first one since Jerome to do a Latin translation based on Greek manuscripts. And the person who did it after him was Erasmus. And so looking at his text is quite interesting, because his Latin reflects the Greek behind it. So to just completely dismiss Latin, specifically when the Textus Receptus translations, or more specifically, the Textus Receptus editions, most of the time had in them the Greek, the Latin, and they compared to the Vulgate. And Erasmus was trying to make a better Latin text, and by using the Greek, he was trying to do that. And so you find right up until Theodore Beza, he had a column with the Greek, a column with his own Latin translation of the Greek, and then he had the Vulgate. And then he'd have notes saying why there's differences between the Vulgate and his text, and why he's chosen certain Greek readings and things like that. And so, I just find sometimes James Snapp Jr. he doesn't go to those type of things. He's not looking at the early church witnesses and saying, well, clearly it's got a quotation of the comma there. He's adopted the critical text mentality. And so sometimes there can be TR people like this as well. People, they believe all the rubbish that's said about Erasmus. They believe that there was, a promise to insert 1 John 5:7 if anyone found it anywhere. There was the rash, wager concept. There's the rush to print thing where they're just running around the scriptorium trying to, piece together this New Testament, and they're trying to, race against the Complutensian and Polyglot and all this sort of stuff. And some people can have all that in their mind. So when you show them Textus Receptus evidence, you actually have to peel back all that information. So it's like someone who is being completely sold out to, we should, bomb Iraq, or something like that. And then you're showing them, hang on, no, there was no weapons of mass destruction. No, Iraq didn't have anything to do with 9/11. No, and just going through those things, you actually have to peel back the layers of deception. And then someone goes, yeah, well, why did we go in there? Sort of thing. And yeah, I just feel that sometimes when James Snapp's talking, he's constantly saying things that the Academy are saying. It's exactly the same stuff where I question all those things, turn them upside down, turn them sideways, have a good look at them, and then go, well, do we accept that as a reasonable explanation or not? Like sometimes even just tiny little things like saying Erasmus never saw Vaticanus. Like, no one knows whether he did or not, but they just say it like, no, he never saw Vaticanus, never. And it's like, well, how do you know? It doesn't say he did, doesn't say he didn't, but he certainly was in all the libraries of Europe. If that was the prized manuscript in the Vatican, surely that would have been the first one that he saw. And I've often had this anecdote of my own that Erasmus walked up the stairs and went in to look at the Codex Vaticanus, but then this green gas just appeared like on Batman and Robin, and he just started choking and he went outside and said, I can't see that manuscript. Like, why wouldn't he see that manuscript? But this is the sort of thing that we're dealing with. Scholars just say whatever they want, and people go, well, a scholar said it, so it must be true, and so anyway, let's move on to Hannah says, also Mike Hollner just posted a debate question for 1 John 5:7 missed due to technical difficulties videos a few hours ago. Yes, he sent me that one, so I'll probably go through that as like a bit of a chaser, and they might even mention some of that material when I interview them. And so I recommend people go and watch that. I think it's only like a 10-minute video, but that'll be interesting. Dwayne Green says, hey Dwayne, welcome out to Revolution. The King James Research Council, thanks for that, Hannah. I've been excited for the possibility of an Ixo's debate review on this one. Popcorn and soda are ready. Thanks, Docky. Good to see you. Hey, Nick, Hannah, Jimmy, Dwayne, and Stephen. So everyone's just high-fiving in the chat. Will Kinney just spoke on this SFT yesterday. Yes. I heard that one. Well, let me clarify. Extant Greek manuscripts. If not there in extant manuscripts, it doesn't count. Yeah, and that's a strange thing, because if you do forensic work, you have to look at things like, say, if there's a murder, like they've got forensics down to the point now where if there is a murder, they mightn't have caught the killer yet, but they go into a house and they can see footprints, muddy footprints. So they measure the shoe, they can take samples of the mud, and they can work out how tall the person is, roughly, how big his shoe is, obviously, and whether it was a male, female. They can do a lot of forensic work without the person being there. So this is the thing. This is the type of thing that we're looking at. We're saying, okay, well, it's not strong in the Greek, but at the end of the day, we can see the forensic footprint everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. But when we look at the Greek, we don't follow the Greek Orthodox Church with the Septuagint, do we? We go, no, the Hebrew is better. When we look at the Septuagint, like even it's 1/3 shorter in the book of Jeremiah. It's so bad. It's like, it's a corrupt document. So when we come to the Byzantine text, we go, yes, the Byzantine text is good, but it's our floor. It's not our ceiling. So the majority text guys go, that's it. That's the text, where we go, no, that's a great start, but now let's look at everything. Let's look at the quotations of the early church writers. Let's look at the Latin. Let's look at everything. And so that's called the closed class of witnesses. There are 3 in the closed class of witnesses. You have the Greek, you have the Latin, and you have the early church writers. The Greek corrects the Latin polishes the Greek, but these two are both guided by the early church writers. Okay, so that's when you're dealing with external evidence. Now, outside of the closed class of witnesses, you've got things like Arabic, Ethiopic, Syriac. You've got a whole bunch of different texts, and you can look at all that too. But then you've got the other side of the coin of all the external evidence, and it's the internal evidence. So looking at, does this make sense? Does it make grammatical sense? Is it a blunder? Is it part of, because majority text people will say, scribes can have homoioteliton homoe arcton, which are both parts of parablepsis. And so this is like, similar beginnings, similar endings, but they're just when you're writing a document in your eye skips over and you miss a line, or you repeat a verse, you do it twice and things like that. And so they will admit that this type of thing can happen in a text. And, blunders can be made. But usually when you talk about that in real time, like Erasmus finding, a place where there's homoieteiton, he's like, well, this is obviously, a place where they made a blunder. They go, where's the manuscript evidence for that? And it's like, well, we're saying that it's a blunder. And so oftentimes they're not going with the type of teaching that they have, that you can have places where there is parablepsis and it can be corrected. They're like, well, we have to have the manuscript evidence for it. And it's like, well, it's obviously a blunder. You've got, if someone who knows Greek fluently, Latin fluently, if they're looking at early church writings and they can figure that out, that's got to be considered as well. But oftentimes I find, specifically, people like James Snapp, they're like, no, say the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verses 18 and 19, where it has book of life. Erasmus clearly said it was homoieteiton, similar endings. And the scribe just missed a few words there. And he put tree of life instead of book of life. And so this was just a part of parablepsis, really. So that's what Erasmus said in his annotations. But that's just completely overlooked, and people are like, where are the manuscripts for that? And it's like, well, if someone spotted a place where there is parablepsis, that has to be talked about at least. People just don't even they just go, no, the manuscript says this, that's it. And it's like, well, like even Dan Wallace said, if you found a document of the preamble to the Constitution of the United States and it said, we the people, in order to form a more perfect onion, you go, oh, hang on, it's not talking about a cooking class. It should say union. Everyone would know that, unless you a complete foreigner, which most people are. Most people don't know Greek. Most people don't know Hebrew, but they're like, they get a dictionary out. They're like, oh, no, maybe it is onion, and they have these weird theories. And it's like people who are fluent in these languages, and I'm not just talking about they can speak the languages, but also they're literary fluent in a sense where they can get any document, any manuscript in the Greek and read it. Like people like Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, a lot of the King James translators were like that as well. And even more superior than Erasmus, Beza, and Stephanus. So that's why we go, well, this scholarship is superior. Just like I look at Georgios Babiniotis, I go, wow, amazing. He's done 6 dictionaries. I haven't done a Greek dictionary. Have you? Could you debate the guy? Could you chat to him in Greek? Could you go to Greece, go and visit him in Athens, and go and get a gyros and tell them not to put chips in it, and you want a lamb gyros and not a pork one? Could you say that in Athens? Most people couldn't. Most people have no idea. So these people are fluent in these languages. And oftentimes what I call the Anglo-Sanhedrin, the English high priests are like, no, well, our dictionaries say, who's a dictionary written by like James Strong and these English guys, and I'm not saying they can't be scholars as well, because King James guys were scholars, so were Beza, Stephanus, and everything. I'm not saying they can't attain fluency, but what I'm saying is that oftentimes they have these weird, that they're going against the norm a lot of the time, and that's why when Westcott and Horton's text came out, it was like, oh, it's filled with all these really weird Greek definitions. And we've seen like monogenes be just translated as only, so like one and only. And it causes contradictions, because in John chapter 1, when it has the only begotten God in their text, they go, well, only begotten God, that's a Gnostic heresy. And so they go, well, how about we just say one and only God instead of only begotten like the NASB? So they have, only God, And then they have to change monogenes in every place. So it's like, well, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And it's like, no, it's only begotten son. Are you a son of God? I am. So is there just only one son? That doesn't make it, actually causes a contradiction, doesn't it? But if it's only begotten son, that's different. And so it's very interesting when you flow through and you see their textual decisions, their redefinitions of terms. Oftentimes, it just shows you how the Anglo-Sanhedrin don't really know what they're doing. A. Hannes says, a 4-hour debate examination, it will take us 26 hours. Yeah, probably. I agree with you, Nick. I'm just giving my assessment of Snapp's reasoning, as I said. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm reading your comment and it looks like I'm down on you. I'm not. You're sort of triggered a thought, and I'm like, I've got to have my 5 minutes of hate. Have you ever read 1984? Or I saw the movie when I was young, and it really impacted me. They had this 5 minutes of hate where they just had a picture of, what was it? ASIO or something. ASIO is the spy agency in Australia. It's quite interesting. But yeah, they were all screaming and yelling out, and then they'd have Big Brother in the end, and they'd all be, saluting and stuff like that. And so I've got to have my 5 minutes of hate, so that's why I'm ranting on before we do this. Hannah, I'm going to mute now until sarcasm is required. Yeah, or you're very helpful with like names and places where, I'm doing the dory or pretty much the goldfish moment, just swimming around the bowl and don't know what I'm doing. Could Dan Wallace go to Greece within a hotel and communicate effectively? Well, he does have a story about that they went to a hotel and they were trying to find out if it was the right hotel and all the rest of it. And they ended up having to write down in Greek because no one could talk to each other. And he's got this story about it. And it's like, you don't know even the basics of Greek. They know how to say hello and bye. But Erasmus, he was working in the scriptorium of Aldus Manutius, the greatest Greek printer probably ever. And he had the school of the Byzantines. There was a whole bunch of people there, and Erasmus was invited to be there, and he was considered just one of their own. That's how fluent he was. And so anyway, we're going to drop this down. We're going to get this video up. And maybe I should have the chat happening, but I'll start from the beginning. Okay. Oh, this is the right size. Okay, so someone said there's no video sound. Okay, well, that's no. How many people are not hearing the video? Because I'm hearing it loud and clear. I haven't changed any of the settings. Maybe what I will do. Okay, so I'll just drop this page. I'll get back to present. I'll delete that. Stop screen, present, share screen, entire screen. I think I didn't click the audio button. There we go. Now I'll just play a little bit, but I will rewind it.
Break the ice. Yes, it is a 2 versus 1.
I think that should be working now. Just let me know that's working. That would be really good. Okay, great. Yeah, I just forgot to click the sound button. Haven't done that in a while, but let's continue.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinski, and I am your host and moderator for tonight's great 1 John 5:7 debate. This is a highly anticipated debate. I know you're excited for it. I'm excited for it as well. And this is going to be comprehensive. We want this to be one of those go-to debates on the topic of 1 John 5:7. And I am thrilled to have 3 participants, James Snapp Jr., Mike Ferrando, and Mike Hollner for tonight's important event. Mike Ferrando and Mike Hollner take the pro 1 John 5:7 position, and James Snapp Jr. the negative. Gentlemen, let's get acquainted and break the ice. Yes, it is a 2 versus 1, James. So I appreciate you doing this, and I can't wait for it, gentlemen. Let's get acquainted, kind of break the ice a little bit. And why don't we start with James? James Snapp, great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also a little bit about your ministry?
Yes. I'm James Snapp. I live here in Franklin, Indiana. For 18 years, I was the preacher at Curtis Christian Church. And in 2021, I had a stroke. It affected my speech, so I had to sit down. But I continue to minister as an author and as an active online presence.
Well, I appreciate the introduction there, James. I'm excited to have you. I'm thrilled.
And so I noticed in some of the comments on SFT's video, they were saying, "Oh, James Snapp sounds like he's drunk" and things like that. Well, he had a stroke, and so it must be really hard to communicate and things like that with having a stroke and foliage and things like that. So you got to look past that and look at exactly what James is saying. Even though we disagree with him, the vast majority of people would disagree with James Snapp Jr. We've still got to give him the benefit of the doubt. We can't just go, "Oh, well, I don't like the way he sounds," because sometimes we have people on our side who can sound pretty funny, and we are in agreement with them, so we overlook those type of things. And so I didn't like that in the chat where people were saying, "Oh, he just sounds like a drunk" and things like that. It's it's not really. You should be looking at the argumentation and not just ad hominem.
Thrilled for the fact that all 3 of you are more than well equipped and educated to discuss this topic. So that's great. Okay, let's start with let's go with Team Mike now. Mike Hollner, let's start with you. I appreciate you being here and doing this. And so how are you today? And also a little bit about yourself.
I'm doing good. Appreciate being here. Appreciate you hosting, Donnie, and James for being here, and Brother Mike. Appreciate you coming out. I got a quick intro on the slides. If you want to go full screen, I'll do that.
Sure.
So just before we go through this, Mike Hollner's he's a mid-trib guy, and so when I've been going through some of the post-trib pre-wrath material by the new IFB, and he's been giving me information about where this position comes from, and looking at Rosenthal and others who have who have sort of introduced this position in the 1990s and then said it's a brand new position. And so he's been quite helpful in just supplying material. We were going to do some videos, but I sort of felt like it could get a bit messy because he's mid-trib, I'm pre-trib, and these other guys are sort of post-trib pre-wrath, and I didn't want to sort of get involved with too many positions all at once. And so even with Alan Kirshner, he has a distinct type of position that is not the same as the new IFB guys who are sort of following Anderson's position. And but anyway, so that's so me and Mike. So Mike on Facebook is Michael George. And so sometimes that can cause a little bit of confusion because it's like for a while there, I thought it was two different people, but I think it's like his middle name, just like Stephen Avery is Stephen Avery Spencer. But yeah, some people just prefer to have that on their Facebooks. But just so you know,
introduction about myself. Let me make sure I got it clicked here. Came to the Lord in 1983. A little over 41 years ago. I felt an immediate call. In 84, I went to Elam Bible Institute and did some missionary work in Venezuela for a few months there. In 84 and 85, I went to Valley Forge Christian College. Originally was going to go for 4 years, but God did call me out after 2. In 86, God called me south to Jacksonville, Florida, where I sat under the late Reverend Ray Pringle, an old-fashioned Church of God and national radio minister. Credits are due him, for I learned more in 2 weeks under him than I did in 2 years of Bible college. Now, most Bible college and seminaries teach all about the Bible, but they don't teach the Bible. And some of you out there in the audience know what I'm talking about. More personal testimony, hard lessons learned, and life-changing decisions, both good and bad, is in my books. In the 2000s, God had to remind me that the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. And in 2015, I established Right Division Ministry, a non-denominational apologetic ministry in defending the Word of God, preparing for the things to come through Bible prophecy teachings, and proclaiming Christ's overcoming message of go and sin no more. All 3 of my books are at KJV Debate or on Amazon, all of the source documentation.
So you can see here the King James only debate, and so that has been pushed on the Textus Receptus Academy page, so people have been looking at that. The mid-tribulation rapture of the bride of Christ, so that's obviously his position. And Go and Sin No More, How to Overcome Sin, the Flesh, the World, and False Doctrine.
Has an endnotes tab, kind of a unique feature there. We endorse and encourage everyone to visit with the King James Bible Research Council.
So this is Phil Stringer here. So this is the guy I'm interviewing in about 8 days. And so that's going to be really awesome. And so obviously these guys know each other. They're sort of part of the King James Research Council. And he's endorsing that. And yeah, and I would encourage people to go through that as well. It's very interesting. They have a lot to say. And I really need to get into these guys a little bit more myself. Yeah, sometimes I'll tune in and listen to stuff, or sometimes it's things I already know. So I'm sort of like, okay, well, but it's good to be refreshed on a lot of this information. And especially like, I don't really know who these other guys are, but I know Phil Stringer, and like Phil Stringer in the TR world, King James world, he is sort of like a DA Waite, or he's like of that caliber with his knowledge, with his understanding. He's prolific in writing material. Yeah, he's done things even 20 years ago that I still utilize and use. He's written a lot about Westcott and Hort. He's written a lot about Gail Ripplinger, actually. So there's this huge sort of fight between the Dean Burgon Society guys and Gail Ripplinger, and they've been at loggerheads, and even Ruckman and these guys. And so it's good to understand those type of things when you're getting labeled a Ruckmanite. Like these guys would be just labeled by James White as Ruckmanites or King James only guys, and they don't want that label. They don't want those labels, and so it's good to know who these guys are and where they stand.
They travel nationwide in defense of the King James Bible. Pastor Tony Tierce of Freedom Baptist Church in Plant City, Florida, he hosts it every July. Lord willing, I'll be out there this July. They have an incredible Bible heritage museum. I would encourage everybody to get on out there. I also have a YouTube page. I hope you subscribe, Right Division Ministry. I kind of favor eschatology, as Donny knows, and being that we both share a love for eschatology.
I'm just going to go back to that page. There's quite a lot of interesting eschatology, Russia's invasion of Israel, the last Trump, and then it looks like James White's there. Looking at the shorter ending, a rebuttal of James Snapp's shorter ending theory at Matthew. So he's been going through James Snapp's material. So a lot of very interesting things to look at.
Eschatology, as Donny knows, and being that we both share a love for eschatology, perhaps an epic 6-way open mic on eschatology.
So that would be an interesting thing to have, and I'm sure that Donny would probably host that. We've got Donny in the house, just saying hello to everyone. And so, a 6-way eschatology open mic. So, but that would be interesting because he's a mid-trib. But it could just be utter confusion. I sort of like it when there's sort of two positions. But it says here, being that Donny and I share the love for eschatology, perhaps the epic 6-way open mic eschatology is in order as to clarify all 6 unique positions of the church. And so I might just read through some of these comments as they're coming. So we've got TurretinFan is in the house. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts, Nick. I plan to turn to this after Revelation 16:5. And so if you don't know, me and TurretinFan have been looking at Revelation 16:5. I wrote a book on it. TurretinFan has been critiquing that book, and I think TurretinFan's done 20 videos about that, and I've done like 30 response videos. So it's been one of those epic things looking at Revelation 16:5. And so, but I've enjoyed it. Dwayne Green says, I'd love to see someone really sit down and discuss why or why not Latin should be used for preservation. Yeah, that would be a really good topic to get into. I know Latin seems to have been demonized because obviously people don't want Roman Catholic teaching. And so it seems like because the Roman Catholics did choose the Latin at the Council of Trent to be the official, that's our Bible, people sometimes demonize the Latin. But when you look at, say, the Clementine Vulgate, so that was sort of like the official sort of like King James type of thing for the Catholics in 1892, I think was their final edition of that. That had the Comia Gentium in it. It had the Principe Adulteri in it. It had the last 12 verses of Mark in it. It's pretty close to the King James. So the things that they were arguing about back then were usually how things were translated, but there were also some differences between the Latin and the Greek. But both Roman Catholics of the Reformation and Protestants of the Reformation would be shocked at how different the critical text is today. And I usually call it a Unitarian text because there's so much Unitarian influence in the Bible societies, and also having Unitarians like George Van Smith on the Westcott and Hort committee, that's influenced that text to remove these obviously Trinitarian verses and downgrade the deity of Christ and things like that. And so people are just chatting in the chat there. Standing for Truth says, Dwayne Green, what's up? A lot of good textual criticism and Bible translation content lately. Yeah, it seems to be ramping right up. So it's good to have everyone on board with that. So TurretinFan and Nick could write a 2 views book on Revelation 16:5 together. Yeah, I mean, if you haven't read my book of Revelation 16:5, I mean, I wrote it in 2019, but even since then, there's been a lot more information come out. I wouldn't say a lot more, but powerful information about what Beezer actually said in his annotations and things like that. So that's very interesting. But let's continue on with the video.
Is in order down the road, as to clarify all 6 unique positions for the church. I enjoyed chess, bowling, paleography, metal detecting, golf, church history, and exploration. And that's enough about me. Now, Brother Snapp did promise to keep the blood spatter to a bare minimum, so going to hold him to his promise there, but that's okay. We do have some friends and angels looking out for us. Quick disclaimer here, and I'll shut my mouth. Brother James did not want to pick a partner in this debate. I need everybody in the audience to realize that, because we didn't want it to be 2 against 1. However, James and Dr. Gurry did take on Dr. Jeff Riddle by himself, so I guess we're going to return the favor tonight. So I did ask him for a few months. Now, some things said in this debate also may not apply to Brother James because he's not a 100% critical text advocate. I am not a scholar, and if I don't have an immediate answer for a question, I promise I will find one and publish it online. Now, for the audience, the opening on the external evidence may be tedious for some and long, but please be patient. For each time slot gets shorter in time, more practical, and down the earth. Frankly, I'll be glad when the slides are over and we can kick back, drink our coffee, and do the Q&A. And that's all I got to say for the intro.
Mike, I appreciate that detailed introduction. Again, I got to say I'm looking forward to this, and also your idea about a 6-person, 6-view eschatology night in the future. I am all for that. So those in the audience interested, shoot me an email. I'm happy to set that up.
Yes.
And, okay, I appreciate that, Mike. And now the other Mike, Mike Ferrando, part of Team Mike. Let's hand it over to you. A little bit about yourself. Actually, I think you might be on mute, Mike. But if you
Mike.
Yeah, new here. I'm in my 60s, married, have 2 kids that are pretty much grown, and I'm a researcher, born again Christian, and saved by Jesus, and he's the author and finisher of my faith. And as a researcher, you know, I wanted to really try to understand some of the issue around the 1 John 5:7. And so I just thought, you know, I read a dissertation by Grantley McDonald called Ghost of Arius. And that just so inspired me. I mean, he had page after page of all of these footnotes. In fact, I almost think the footnotes were longer than the paper. And it just was incredible, all of the exceptions to his theory found in these manuscripts. And so being someone who, you know, it really loves history and all, I started to get this idea, and I just really prayed about it. And I thought, you know, it's so easy. A lot of these, the usual evidences are spread around, and there's actually even some errors that people have fallen into that are spread around as well. And I just said, you know, why don't we just bring all this together in one place and translate it all to English, and then people can make up their own minds. You know, they can look at it and decide whether or not there is a Christian witness for these verses to be a part of the Bible. And from what I have determined in the research that I've done in compiling all of this and having professional translators, is that yes, it's the evidence is incredible, and it has been building for some time. While, you know, the critics tend to be stuck in theories that have, you know, really run aground a long time ago. So I just felt, you know, the thing I wanted to do was get this information out. So I created a number of papers on academia.edu under my Gmail account, and they're free. You can download them. The shorter ones have.
So I really want to emphasize that this is the book, The Witness of God is Greater. So this is Mike Ferrando. It gets updated quite regularly. So this is just in April. And 23rd, so it's the 25th. So 2 days ago, he's updated it. And when you go through, there's just so much here that that there is just so much. And so he's going through absolutely everything, even things that, can just be truncated illusions and things like that. He's explaining those things and looking at those things. But look at the amount of evidence, like 150 to 200, the Acts of John, sermon on the 100-fold, 60-fold, and 30-fold, Tertullian, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Dionysius, Bishop of Alexandria, Dionysius of Rome. So a lot of this stuff is way before Codex Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are said to be, dated. And there's just so much information here. So if you want the premier information on the Communahanium, you need to get this book. Okay, so where did I just find this? Well, it happens to be on one of my Facebook pages, which is 1 John 5:7. So I'll try and share this. I'll copy the link. And hopefully this doesn't come up in a whole bunch of sections. Hopefully you guys can click on that. But hopefully you can click on it, rather than write it out or anything. But if you that goes to his Google Drive, and so that's the one that he's sharing. And look at the information, like how much information is here. Now, some of these guys, like Manuel Callicus and Joseph Branius, I've actually done articles on these guys on my page. And like when you look at Manuel Callicus, he's written out the comma. So this is like 100 years before Erasmus was even on the scene doing his thing, and he has exactly the same as what Scrivener has, except for Holy Spirit it says Spirit Holy instead of Holy Spirit. It's exactly the same. It has a comma there. This is just completely ignored by the Academy. And so if you want to know whether 1 John 5:7 is legitimate, a legitimate verse or scripture that we should look at, you need to read this book. You need to go through this. Obviously, he's got his own presuppositions and things like that, but I do find it quite balanced. And sometimes too, even just oh yeah, he's mentioned me there. That's great. And so sometimes even going through this material, he might have just be talking about someone and just copy and paste it from sort of Wikipedia or whatever, just to save time and maybe tidy it up as he goes. But it's worth going through this material, especially if you find, they're talking about Cyprian or something like that, to just go to the index, find where it's talking about Cyprian, and look at the information that he's got here is invaluable. It's very, very, very well researched. And as I said, Mike Ferrando helped me a lot when it came to Revelation 16:5, and because he has access to a lot of works that are coming through Congress, so which is really very helpful, because in the Library of Congress they're trying to scan in everything. And so yeah, this book, The Witness of God is Greater, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's the best book out there on the Communahanium at the moment. And so let's continue.
Are focused on certain events, and they have manuscript images in many of them. So that was what I really wanted to do, to offer these. So since the people have been so happy with the work that I've done, I met Mike Hollner, and he asked me to come on and just do some presentations for it. I think, I studied the critical arguments. I have a college degree in history, and I also went to Reformed Theological Seminary and took Greek. I'm not a Presbyterian, so I didn't stick around. I just wanted the Greek teaching. And then I was mentored for a year by an emeritus Greek professor. And I just kept working at it and praying, and the Lord really gave me, a lot of help and wisdom to be able to understand Greek. And I've been, working at it for some time. So anyway, I'm going to present some material. I just hope you'll excuse me, because one of the things that's happened since we decided on this debate is I've been under attack spiritually, and my eyesight has really become a problem. It's on the mend, but I can't really use my left eye, and reading is not easy. So, but I just have internalized so much of this information in creating these papers, looking at all these manuscripts, that I think I'm talking with Mike Hollner, who is familiar with my stuff. I think I'll be able to do well, and he's made some slides for me. So thank you for giving me a chance to do this presentation, and see how it goes.
My pleasure. Mike Ferrando, prayers for you, of course. And I got to say to the audience, this is going to be an incredibly thought-provoking, information-packed debate. So get ready to take some notes and really consider the information. And so our first stage for the debate is going to be the external evidence. And that is going to start with Mike Hollner and his presentation. Let me just get that up and ready to go. And that'll be for about 25 to 30 minutes with the slides. And then we're going to hand it over to James Snapp Jr., who's going to open with equal time, 25 to 30 minutes. And then Mike Ferrando will have his 25 to 30 minutes as well. And then James Snapp will get a response for 25 to 30 minutes. And so that'll be stage one of tonight's comprehensive debate. And then after that, we'll get into stage two. And so for now, Mike Hollner, I'm going to hand it over to you. And whenever you're ready, please let me know. You've got 25 to 30 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Okay, so just before we get into that, I'll just let people know if they're struggling to get the Witness of God is Greater. The Witness of God is Greater book, the PDF. I just put it on the Textus Receptus Academy. So I run the Textus Receptus Academy, and it should be up the top there. So you can just go there and download that PDF. So that's the most recent one. So I just thought I'd do that. Okay, let's get into the presentation.
Okay, can you go 100% full screen? Thank you. Welcome to a portion of the external evidence for 1 John 5:7. He who has lived to throw light upon a single passage of Scripture has not lived in vain. With God's help tonight, we will be shedding some light and new information for many.
Okay, so one thing, when I went through one of the videos with Thomas Ross, Thomas Ross debated James White. Now, one of the things that, because I listened to the debate, I found it very, very good. But James White at the end of the debate sort of had a bit of a thing where he said, look, you got way too much information. There's too much information in all these slides and all the rest of it. And at first I was in agreement with James White. I was like, yeah, because I was going through doing like checking everything. And it ended up, I had to check like and read through every page, and he had so much information. And I didn't realize he was putting them up on a slide behind. I actually thought they got put on the debate later. And at first I didn't like it. Because I listened to it, I hadn't noticed that. But then when I was going through it, it just seemed like a lot of clutter But in the end, I actually thought it was the better way to do it, because it seems like when there is a lot of information in a slide, well, you listen to what the person has to say and you take that on board. And then later on, this is all the information that you really need for further study. And so having a lot more information is probably the better way to go, rather than just having scanty little bits of information. And so I'm going to go through, and like I did with Thomas Ross's video, I'm going to pause it. We're going to read through it. If there's anything that we need to learn or understand, or we have to look someone up, or look up a bit of material on a Google search, we'll do that, just like I did with the Thomas Ross material. And I found at the end of the Thomas Ross material, I was like, man, Thomas Ross knows so much. We need to know a lot of his material. And so I think it's going to be the same with this. By the time we get to the end of this, and we're examining a lot of what they're claiming, I think we're going to be well educated in comma defense. And so just with this slide here, it says, he who has lived to throw light upon a single passage of scripture has not lived in vain. So that was Joseph Justus Scaliger from 1540 to 1609. And so, yeah, usually these ones on an angle seem to be the ones that get read out. With God's help tonight, we'll be shedding light with new information for many. So, yeah, I won't repeat those ones if it's just what he's saying. He's got, this is the issue. There are three that bear record in heaven: the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. Probably the greatest Trinitarian verse in the entire Bible. Yes, you can formulate the Trinity from other places. You can even formulate the Trinity from the Old Testament. But this verse explicitly mentions the Father, Word, and Holy Spirit being one. So it's a very important verse. 1 Samuel 3:19 says, and Samuel did let none of his words fall to the ground. And then it has here underneath the writing, which I hope will drop down if I stop moving my... No, it won't. It says, this one verse of scripture gives the most concise and unique clarification of the Trinity not found in any other verse or verses of scripture, both promoting sound doctrine and refuting heresies within the Christian church. So that's a quotation by Charles Forster. And so if you want to get any of this information, if you go to my website, which is the TextusReceptus.com website, so this one here, if you go to the main page, if you type in tr.org.au, very simple, tr.org.au, it'll redirect you here. And if you go down near the bottom of the page, there's like a list of topics, your Revelation 16:5, Matthew 1:1, but 1 John 5:7's there. And I've got an index of Johannine comma articles. So these are articles that I've worked on. And so it has origin, Tertullian, quite a lot of information here that you can look at. And so what I also have at the bottom of each one of these pages is like a bit of a list. And so this might be, a couple of years old now, but it has, Trinitarian Bible Society on the comma, Jeffrey Koo on the comma. It's got a lot of Jeff Riddle about debating with Elijah Hixson online, just their chats, a review of Grantley MacDonald's book, Erasmian myths on the comma. So there's lots and lots of information by other writers about the comma Johanneum there. And when we go down here as well, there's a link to a bunch of books. So we've got internal articles that I've written, Elijah Hixson, Peter Ruckman, Hutter's Polyglot, etc. But we can see here, like, where's the Forster book? There it is, Forster. A New Plea for the Authenticity, Charles Forster, 1867. So you can click on there or go to these other links, and you can read that book for yourself. So I just thought I'd mention that. So I might throw that link directly into the chat there. So if anyone wants to do more research into this, oftentimes I've put up information and I'll link back to books and things like that. So there's a lot of older books here as well. Richard Pawson, who's against the comma. So I've got for and against, so you can make up your own decisions. Joseph Bryannius's comma quotation and things like that. So anyway, I thought I'd add that in because this quotation down the bottom here,
the most contested verse of,
sorry about that, was by Charles Forster. So with that book in 1867. So if you want to find, that where that quotation is, if you go to my website, usually it's there.
Scripture and church history. It is my prayer tonight that we will all be as Samuel and not allow any of God's words to fall to the ground. That includes 1 John 5:7, for there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. Now the witnesses for 1 John 5:7 are very extensive, as in a mountain of evidence. However, due to the time clock tonight, we will only be able to cover a small percentage of this evidence for the verse.
Okay, so he's got quite a lot of categories here. The context of Scripture, the comma flows contextually, the pre-Erasmus Greek manuscripts, a minority, yet still a witness. That's very true. The 49 out of 50 Latin manuscripts, 98% of all Latin manuscripts have the comma. So this is a something that F.H.A. Scrivener mentioned. So he was on the Westcott and Hort committee, and he said out of 50 manuscripts, 49 of them have the comma. And so it's very strong evidence in the Latin manuscripts. Then we look at the Greek grammar experts, and I've already sort of touched on that, but like Eugenius Vulgaris, he's a very interesting guy to look at because he basically just got all the information from the early Greek writers, and he was publishing a lot of their material. And then he wrote his own article defending the comma and saying that it had a solecism there if you take 1 John 5:7 out. So in a nutshell, if you have 1 John 5:7 in there, there's no grammatical error. If you take it out, verse 8 that's remaining with the water, blood, and spirit, that the genders are changed there for no reason, because in Greek you have it's an inflected language, and so you have words change according to its context. And so if you don't have the context of 1 John 5:7 in there, you have this grammatical solecism, they call it in Greek. So that's what Eugenius Vulgaris is talking about. Erasmus also saw this, and he mentions this in his Annotationis, which is the commentary that he had in his 1522 edition that he put the comma in. This was also spotted by like people like John Calvin. Many people mention this issue of grammar. And that was one of the reasons why I contacted Georgios Babiniotis, the world-leading expert in the Greek language. And I said, was Eugenius Vulgaris correct? And it's got a whole page in Greek, and he read through it and said, yes, he's correct. He said there is an error there. And he said, not only that, there is a syntactic parallelism that is a greater defense for that verse being included. So he's on our side. He's a Greek grammarian, and he said that it should be in there. So we see also the evidence of the church fathers. There's a mountain of evidence with the church fathers. Now, some people might call them the early church writers. I prefer that label rather than fathers. Fathers seems to be a bit more, I guess, Anglican or Catholic. It's like they're our ancestors, where some of them are heretical origin, and others where I prefer to just call them the writers. So then I don't have to go, well, I'm linked to these guys. I can I can choose who I want to be aligned with. And then there's the internal church body, the Spirit speaking to the church. So this has been accepted in the English-speaking church for a long time. I mean, Tyndale had it in his edition. Even Wycliffe had it in his, but he had the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He didn't have the word written there. The comma is sound doctrine. And so there's a whole concept of the Jesus-only movement. That would be modalism and things like that. So that looks like he's got a category for that. And 1 John corruptions. So early 1 John corruptions, the Arians, looking at the Arians. So I know Stephen Avery seems to say it was the Sabellians who corrupted it. But I think with the information that was provided in this debate, we can clearly see that Arians had quite a lot of sway in those times, and especially when we're dealing with the was it 417 or 418 bishops who had testified to 1 John 5:7 in their debate against the Arians. So that's quite an interesting bit of evidence that they've brought up there. And so this is a picture of a document that has Latin on one side and the Greek on the other. So I'm pretty sure that's dated to like the 14th century. So the Holy Ghost to the Apostle John in 90 AD to the early church in Antioch, Rome, Spain, and future Reformation. And it's got a chain of custody. And then it has the Greek Old Italic Latin pre-Waldensian Bibles. And so it goes through the Old Latin with the 98% of the Latin having those readings. The historical documentation showing 1,500 years and hundreds of church father witnesses. And so that's in that book that I showed you, the free PDF, The Witness of God is Greater. The Greek Textus Receptus, Latin for received text of the early church up to today. And so if you read Frederick Nolan, and again, I'll just grab my, or actually I've shut that page, so I won't grab my website. Maybe I haven't. Where is it? No, here it is. So if you go to my page there, you can go to, Frederick Nolan. So he spoke a lot about those type of things. He spent a lot of time on the comma. And then we've got a 500-year history as churches, reformational, traditional, received confessional text. So, we've got like a 500-year history of it being in our Bibles in English and many other Bibles that are based upon the Textus Receptus and adhere to the King James Version. And so let's continue.
Now, in 1522, Erasmus was not the first to include 1 John 5:7 in a Greek New Testament. 8 years prior, the 1514 polyglot was the first Greek New Testament to include 1 John 5:7 from very ancient Greek codices. Polyglot scholar Mariano Rico stated, the main argument of which these annotations deal with are the differences which exist between the Greek text and the Vulgate of the New Testament. Johann Goetz proves in 4 works against Semler the authenticity of 1 John 5:7 in the polyglot, as he defended the antiquity and value of the Greek manuscripts from which the passage had been taken, and not translated from the Latin. The Greek text of the polyglot came not from the Latin Vulgate, as modern scholarship claims, but from older Greek manuscripts. Now, our opponent is not alone in being completely silent on any mention of the polyglot at all, as in his 5 essays dissertation on 1 John 5:7. Now, 1 John 5:7 does...
Okay, so I want to go back and look at some of these and just see if there's anything that can trigger some interesting thoughts on that. Go back as far as I can here. And for some people, I want to sort of explain, in 1514, the Complutensian polyglot came out. So this was an idea by Roman Catholic scholars in Spain. So the Complutensian polyglot was basically to be a New Testament and Old Testament with dictionaries in it, commentaries at the back, and basically showing where it had the Greek, it had the Latin, and in the Old Testament it had the Greek, Latin, and the Hebrew. And so in 1514, they had completed their New Testament, and it has, as is shown here, highlighted here, it has the comma. Now, this footnote isn't really saying, oh, it shouldn't be in here, whatever. What it's saying, it's talking about a specific part of this verse, and it's talking about Thomas Aquinas. So it's not, it hasn't really got that much to do with, it not being in there or it being in there. It's really actually sort of like a bit of a side issue. And so, but it says here, the Complutensian Polyglot, the New Testament volume, was the first to be printed, volume 5, completed in 1514. It contained the Greek text and included a Greek dictionary with Latin equivalents. And so when they say, Erasmus was rushing to beat this edition, well, actually, when you look at the Complutensian Polyglot, they did the New Testament first, but they also did a Hebrew dictionary at the end of the New Testament section. Then they did the Old Testament. So these two things go together. So it's not like it's, they just did like a separate Greek and Latin one, and they were trying to push that out. You had to wait until, I think it was 1517, until they had actually completed the Old Testament. And then it fully became published in 1522. And they did 600 editions. Only 123 survived to this day. So about 80% of them are just lost in time, which shows you if things are old, they're going to get lost in time. There are some things that are just completely lost. Just look at older Greek ancient works. Sometimes we only have half of a story. The rest of it's just gone. And it doesn't matter how many people in the ancient world had it. It's dust today. It's lying in a pile of mud, all covered in mold, and it's never going to be retrievable, or it's just dried up and blown away in dust. And so Erasmus did his edition in 1516. In his third edition, in 1522, he inserted the Comma Johanneum. So his 1516 edition, he didn't have it. In his 1519, he didn't have it, but in his 1522, he did, and he explained why. And he clearly talks about Jerome. He talks about the grammatical issues. So he's becoming aware of these. And in 1521, he actually did sort of like a bit of a paraphrase. Now, paraphrase wasn't like, the Message Bible or, that type of thing. His paraphrase was more so trying to explain the Word of God and to look at things. It's different from what we have today. But he has the comma in that, which is quite interesting. And so let's continue. So it has here, although Erasmus's first Greek New Testament was first as being published in 1516, the Complutensian was the first printed edition in 1514 and later published in 1522. So we can see, so this is Bruce Metzger. Who's Bruce Metzger? Well, he is one of the main architects behind the Nestle Alarm text that's used by modern Bibles today. And so he's written a lot of books, the New Testament, Transmission, Corruption, and Restoration by Bruce Metzger. Bart Ehrman was his last student. And so you can sort of see this chain. Now, a lot of people respect Bruce Metzger as a great scholar. I think he's a scholar, but I think Bart Ehrman wasn't just created it wasn't like he was a great Christian and a defender of the Word of God, and then he just went rogue. No, he was following the logical conclusion of people like Bruce Metzger and came to a position of unbelief. But he does clearly say that he became an unbeliever because he thinks God's unjust and he sees cruelty in the world. And so not having a theology where Satan causes bad things to happen to people, he has a whole thing where God's just doing this to people. And so he didn't like God anymore. And so that's what he says. But also it wouldn't have helped to have people like Bruce Metzger over your shoulder every day telling you, no, that's not in the Bible. No, the King James is wrong there. No, the Textus Receptus is ridiculous. We need to throw it out and all that sort of stuff. And so this guy, Mariano Rivella Rico, he is a scholar on the Complutensian. Okay. So it says here, so this is from Metzger. It says, for Greek copies, indeed, we are indebted to your holiness, who sent us most kindly from the apostolic library very ancient codices, both of the Old and New Testament. So this was to Pope Leo X. So he was the Pope around the time of, if you've ever watched the Luther movies, he's the one who's like the one shooting or spearing the pigs and all that, and he was trying to kill Luther. And he was around the time of Erasmus and around the time of the Complutensian polyglot. So he gave the Complutensian scholars access to the Vatican Library and said, use whatever manuscripts you want. So you notice they didn't grab Vaticanus off the shelf and use that for the New Testament. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Erasmus knew about Vaticanus. He didn't use it either. Scholarship just rejected that manuscript. All the Reformation, they rejected it. It wasn't until hundreds of years later that worst manuscript was elevated to the top of the pile, and that's become the best one now. So it's quite strange. So let's continue with some of these pictures. They change as we go along. Okay, so the title of the work by Gozzi was A Complete Defense of the Complutensian Greek Testament, with a collation of the principal differences between the Greek text and the Latin text of that edition. A continuation of the defense appeared in 1769. So it's just a bit of a footnote there. It says John Goetzi, 1717 to 1786, proves in 4 works against Semler the authenticity of 1 John 5:7 in the polyglot, as he defended the antiquity and value of the Greek manuscripts from which the passage had been taken and not translated from Latin. So that comes from purebibleforum.com. And so I will get that site up, seeing that if you go to my TR page, Pure Bible Forum. And who's that? That's Stephen Avery. So Stephen Avery is prolific in writing about the comma. So you can either go to What's New and he'll have things. He's talking about Sinaiticus issues. But if you go to search, you can type in comma. And usually you'll find something. Yeah, Grantley MacDonald. He's talking about Grantley MacDonald's issues. But maybe if we type in 1 John 5:7, it's not the best search engine. But anyway, he's got lots like Revelation 1:8, very interesting. But yeah, I would recommend that you go to his site, have a look at the information there, and sometimes he's just got like Jehovah, Codex Sinaiticus, miscellaneous things, Granville Sharp Rule, and a whole bunch of other very interesting things. Yeah, the heavenly witnesses. So he's got a whole section on the heavenly witnesses, super evidences, the Solecism, Cyprian, Eusebius. So this is where Stephen Avery, myself, Mike Ferrando, and Mike Hollner, we're all sort of in this realm here, looking at this type of material. Erasmus and the heavenly witnesses, Latin manuscripts. And so if we just click on, say, the Latin manuscripts one, it's got it in Old Latin or Vulgate Latin, so making a separation there. And you might look at Leon Palimpsest, and he's got a bit of information there. You can look up Google Books. So if you really want to do your homework, go to these pages. He's got The witness of God is greater. So he's mentioning that book. And so this is the go-to place for the comma as well. So you can find that on my website, a link to that. So let's continue.
Works against Semler.
Whoops. So I know a few other little things popped up here. And so we have Richard Smallbroke, 1672 to 1749, Archbishop of Canterbury, who wrote an inquiry into the authority of the Complutensian polyglot. And so, and he has, in order to decide the dispute about 1 John 5:7, and so he's writing there. So this has been written about long ago, and it's great to go through these authors and see that these guys were bringing up very similar evidence to what we are bringing up today. So Scrivener, he said, yet we must emphatically deny that on the whole, the Latin Vulgate had an appreciable effect upon the Greek. So he's saying the opposite of what James Snapp's saying. James Snapp's like, no, we've got, well, actually, maybe he's not saying the opposite in a sense where James Snapp's looking at this information from a different angle, where we're saying Latin and Greek. There wasn't a great wall of China between Greece and Italy, was there? And even though the book of Romans, it's written to the Romans, it's written in Greek. We would understand that and think that. We wouldn't think it's been written in Latin to the Romans. And that's because of Alexander the Great. The Greek language was spread around the world. And so Latin and Greek, these are two places that are side by side. So it's a bit like France and Germany. We've even got places like Switzerland that have, French Swiss or German Swiss, that they adopt sort of their own type of dialect. And so you wouldn't think that the Latin and the Greeks would be so separate. Like there's no Great Wall of China between them. So obviously Latin affects the Greek, Greek affects the Latin. And even when we look at ancient Greek and ancient Latin, we see sometimes that the Romans were pretty much, stealing a lot of the Greek culture. They were getting a lot from the Greeks. And so why would it seem strange that they were adopting readings from the Greek and things like that? But to me, Latin is a very strong witness to what the Greek had. And so let's continue.
Manuscripts.
Oops. So the Commuhanium 5 essays. So James Snapp's written 5 essays on the Commuhanium. Now, our opponent is not alone in being completely silent on any mention of the polyglot at all, as in his 5 essays dissertation on 1 John 5:7. So it is true that people have been selective in some of the information. I know some people feel like they've already won the battle, but there's more information coming out all the time that they haven't dealt with, and sometimes they just don't want to deal with it. And so, and I think, the book, The Witness of God is Greater, I think, James Snapp should have really read through that before he did his debate, because there's quite a lot in that completely overrides his position. Okay. All right. So then we change. So I'll just jump onto some of these chats. So we have Bryan Ross is in the house saying hello. And Docky says, Bryan Ross, any plan for a Kindle ebook version of your new book? So Bryan Ross has just written a new book about verbatim identicality. And so that'll be an interesting one to go through and look at. And so, so I've got 600 subs. So the channel's getting more and more popular. And I guess too, it's a bit like the Textus Receptus Academy. We mightn't have, we've got like 3,000 people on there, but we mightn't have like, 20,000, but it's quality information. And that's really what I want to do. Is deep dives into a lot of this sort of stuff. which won't attract people who just want a cursory understanding of it, but people who want to study these things out and get their mind around these issues. I think the channel will be good for that. TurretinFan asks, why did Erasmus write about asking about the readings of Vaticanus if he rejected it? Well, I guess it's just looking at all the information. And so I believe that he first saw Vaticanus when he went to Rome. And so he knew of the manuscript, but it's a huge manuscript. And to sit down and write all the variants out and things like that would take a long time. So he went back to Basel, and with Froben doing his Greek and Latin editions. And then I think it was in 1527, Sepultiva. Bombasius had already written to him about it. Now, he lived with Bombasius when he was in Venice. So these guys knew each other very well. So Bombasius was like the curator of the library in the Vatican. And then that job was given to Sepultiva, or perhaps Sepultiva was just sort of working there. But he ended up sending, I think it was like 365. I sort of remember that number, but it could be a little bit wrong. Places of difference from Vaticanus. And so I don't think we had that list today, but it was written about. So in his 1535 edition, I'm pretty sure it's that edition, Erasmus said that he believed that Vaticanus was most probably a back translation from a Latin document, and he believes it was amended in the Council of Florence, which was around about 1340. So he didn't have a high view of it. And John Mill in 1707, he sort of said the same thing. He felt that it was probably a back translation from a Latin document. So it wasn't valued. And so he looked at these issues, he looked at these places and rejected those places. And so I'm pretty sure he contacted Bombasius when it was to do with the Comiohenium. So he just wanted to check everywhere. So he was like, okay, well, show me what it says, maybe even marginal notes or whatever. And so he just showed him. Perhaps they didn't understand the omelettes. Now, the omelettes is an issue where you've got dots on the side of a lot of places in Vaticanus where there's textual issues, you have these dots. So this has been brought up sort of like in the 1990s. And some people have felt that these were from the original pen of the authors of Vaticanus. Other people, and this comes up in the debate, other people say, no, it comes from the 1500s. And so recently it was actually, what's his name? Nehemiah Gordon, who was one of the main guys looking at this issue. So if you don't know who Nehemiah Gordon is, TurretinFan would know who he is, because I've been sort of saying, hey, you need to look into Nehemiah Gordon's concepts of Jehovah and the name of God and all this sort of stuff. So he's a Jewish guy. He's not a Christian, but he does hang around Christian circles. And we've sort of come to the same conclusion about the name of Jehovah from just different angles. And which isn't hard to do if you just sort of read older material and just sort of join the dots and things like that. But his material on the name of Jehovah being the three I ams that are mentioned in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14, where it has I am three times. He's saying these are to do with the past, the present, and the future. And the very next verse says the name of God, and it is the name of Jehovah, which is basically to be. It comes from Hava. So Hava means to be. The I ams basically have the three tenses of the past, present, and future. And this comes into play with Revelation 16:5, with the past, present, and future of the one which is and was and shalt be. And so looking at that type of etymology. So I've been studying that for quite a while. So Nehemiah Gordon, he was actually just recently, it was sort of like 4 months ago, 5 months ago or something, and they were looking at these dots in Vaticanus. And so when we get to that point in the video, we'll talk more about that, but I just sort of mention it. So let's see if there's any more there. No, I think that was it.
7 for Erasmus's.
Yes. Okay. So we've got another page come up. So
is not alone in being completely silent on any mention of the polyglot at all, as in his 5 essays dissertation on 1 John 5:7. Now, 1 John 5:7 does have 10 Greek witnesses and several before Erasmus's time in the text, such as Codex 629 in the 1300s on the screen here, and Codex 61 actually dated at 1272 by scholar Adam Clark. More on that later. Now, 5 are in the text, 2 are very late, and 5 or 6 are in the margins, dating as early as the 900s. So run from anyone who claims there is no Greek support for the comma. In fact, the omission of the verse only has a 2.9% pre-10th century backing. What we mean by this, if you look at the bar chart on the screen here, is out of the estimated 5,800 existing Greek manuscripts today, only less than 10% of those even contain 1 John 5 at all. And out of that small percentage, which does need to be cross-examined, by the way, out of that less than 10%, only 14 are before the 10th century. In fact, there is 0 Greek manuscript evidence at all, for or against the verse, for almost the first 400 years of church history. And most of the Greek omissions are in later manuscripts after the 10th century. Only 5 are before the 700s. Or is it 4? Or is it 3? We really need some objective expert paleographers to come forward, and let's start a systematic re-examination of the manuscript evidence. Now, modern scholars use the argument that there are only 2 to 3 Greek manuscripts for the comma in the text, yet turn right around and ignore that same argument in holding to 2 to 3 Greek manuscripts for their shorter ending of Mark's gospel. This is inconsistent, my friends. Now, what we have today is a...
Okay, so I'm going to go through those slides because there was a few popped up there that had some things written, but most of the earlier stuff was very straightforward. And so this text here is basically the same as this text here. It's just, I'm pretty sure that was outlined in a book. And so they just traced over this one, but they also put in what was bleeding through the page behind and things like that. And so that's the Latin, that's the Greek, and that's just a modern picture of the Greek there. So this has the comma in it. Now, it might have the comma in it. It has like pater, logos, and it's sort of a little bit blurred because so many people have been looking at this, so it's smudged a bit. But it's like, agios pneuma, Holy Spirit. So, but it's claimed that it doesn't have the articles. Now, I remember when I was first looking at it, I thought perhaps these dots could have represented articles, but I don't think that's logical anymore. But so he has also Codex Montfortianus. So what is this manuscript? So this one's in the 1300s. Okay, so no one disagrees with that. They're all saying, okay, it's in the 1300s. But they say, oh, well, because it's got a Latin commentary, oh, not a Latin commentary, a Latin parallel Bible, so it's basically Greek and Latin. It's just basically translated from the Latin. But if you go back, I went back and looked at some of the issues that are in the book of Acts. I think it was the book of Acts. I can't really remember where I looked. And there were places where the Latin and the Greek disagreed. So if it's just a copy of the Latin, basically it's not just a copy of the Latin. That's what I'm trying to say. It could be a copy of a Latin, or it could just be a copy of a Greek text with a Latin parallel. So people just immediately assume, well, it's got a Latin there, so it's just a Latin translation of it. But at the end of the day, when you go back and look at some of the other readings, there are places where it has the Latin and it doesn't have the Greek, and other places where it has the Greek and it doesn't have the Latin. So you got to be careful about just making these sweeping assumptions on these manuscripts. And oftentimes that type of thing is used just to throw that evidence out and go, we don't have to look at that anymore. And so what we see with Codex Montfortianus 61, this is the manuscript that they claim that was hot off the press sort of thing, or, you know, hot out of the scriptorium, where Erasmus is like, well, if I could find a, you know, manuscript of 1 John 5:7, I'd use it. And then someone's like wrote a whole document and then given it. And he's like, well, I guess I found one now, you know, and it was just written on demand sort of thing. And so, but Adam Clark actually dated this to 1272. So that's not usually brought up either. So it's quite an interesting thing to listen to what Adam Clark says about the text. And there are people who have looked at the text who claim it's older. People who haven't seen the text, they claim it's a very young text. It's around about the time of Erasmus. So even on, if you look up on Wikipedia, they'll date this to 1520. So it's like 2 years before Erasmus put the comma in his text. It's like, it's pretty amazing that they do that. But we see, you know, in evolution, they date things, that they have a presupposition that things are, you know, so old, but they'll just say something's like, you know, 100,000 years old, but they're just making guesses. And we know that if you're a young Earth creationist, which most of us are, we know that that's pseudoscience. And so we've got to be very careful about these dating methods. And so this gets thrown out saying, oh, it's got Latin there. So anytime there's just a sniff of Latin, it's like, throw it out. But this one here, it's like, well, it's a Greek one. If this was dated to 1272, it's a really good witness of the comma. But let's just say it was hot off the press or hot out of the scriptorium, and it was 1520. So you've got to look at who's making these claims and who's pulling, where are they pulling these dates from? And so he mentioned that there's zero Greek evidence at all for or against the verse for almost the 400 years of church history. So, you know, and this is one of the issues where they're finding papyri and things like that. But he makes a very good point that out of, you know, the 5,800, you know, sometimes the number is 5,200. I don't know why there's such a discrepancy between those numbers. Peter Gurry sort of said there was 5,200. We're like, okay, we'll all get in line and say that's the number. But then he later on, it was like, no, there's probably 5,800. It's like, oh, okay, I don't understand how they're getting that number. But that's how many complete manuscripts there are. So that can be something as big as a credit card, just one manuscript, or it can be a whole New Testament. But at the end of the day, only about 501 have that reading where the comma should be. And so that's less than 10% of the whole. So there's 501. And he makes a really good point here where it's like most of the Greek omissions are in the latter part after the 10th century. Only 5 are before the 700s. Or is it 4 or is it 3? So he's like, but we've got to question all this information. So and I'll just point out here, he's written Erasmus, scholars' favorite go-to. People go, Erasmus, straight away. They go to Erasmus. Most of them haven't read his annotations where he says that Jerome, in his preface, mentions about the comma being omitted. He clearly talks about that. And then he talks about the grammatical errors that occur in the text if you don't have the comma in it. Exactly the same argument that we're making today. So a lot of people don't talk about that. That Erasmus basically said that. Now we've got our opponents magnify the list of Latin manuscript omissions, most of them verified by TR scholars, as if they forgot the earlier is better argument, and for this case, it does not fit their narrative. So what you'll find is critical text people all of a sudden become majority text people. Now, the last 12 verses of Mark, they're like, well, we can just have Vaticanus and Sinaiticus backing that up and neglect. It's like, I saw a fresh number for that the other day. Someone was writing on Facebook about it. It was like 1,654 manuscripts now that have it and 2 that don't. And so obviously they don't care about the majority. They have a presupposition that Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are the best, the oldest and best, and they're going to follow them. They're going to put double brackets in the Nestle Alarm United Bible Society text, the 28th edition. In the next one they bring out, it's still going to be in double brackets because of 2 manuscripts. Okay, so here you've got 2 manuscripts. This one's 1300s. This one is 1272. Apparently, it could be around there. But we throw, they all of a sudden go, we're majority text people. We're just counting heads now. They're not doing that. Most of the time we have the majority. It's a very rare moment when Textus Receptus people don't have the majority reading. So, and oftentimes this is where we're battling, because they're like, hey, you guys don't have the majority. And we could just turn around and go, yeah, but you don't have it in 50 places in Matthew. Let's look at all your places. But then they're like, oh, we're not majority text people. And it's like, well, okay, why are you holding us to a majority text then? But the thing is, they're not looking at the Latin, are they? If we were to look at the Latin, is it the majority text there? 98% of the Latin has it. That's a huge percentage. And so that's why they have to throw the Latin out. That's why they have to make these manuscripts not really matter. And they're constantly downplaying everything. So they've gone through all the material and just made little stories and anecdotes about everything, so that you're just left there going, oh, okay, well, I'll just trust the scholars then. And so he's saying here there's about 10 Greek manuscripts with it in it. Now, Elijah Hixson, he did a pretty good job at pointing out this sort of information. But some people were like, wow, look at this new information. I don't think anyone on the side of the King James or Textus Receptus is unaware that it's slim in the Greek. We freely admit that. But what we're saying is that we don't just go, okay, well, the Greek says it, that's it. We go, okay, yes, the Greek in some manuscripts does say it, but we look at all the evidence. We go to the Latin. We see the majority text guys aren't going to the Latin and looking at all that. We go to the early church writers. Now, sometimes they might look at the early church writings and things like that, but most of the time it's like, well, if it's not in the head count, it's not considered a reading. And so hopefully that helps you to sort of understand this a little bit. Now, it says here, have all the Syriac manuscripts that clamor for attention been catalogued yet from the libraries in the East? So that's Metzger. He's asking that. Latin and Syriac manuscripts are not studied, for they did not fit into the narrative. So that's Michael Maynard, who wrote a book on the Comia Hanium, and Stephen Avery ended up with his laptop, which is quite interesting.
Or is it 4?
So he's put up this picture. Can someone outside the critical text camp verify this witness against the comma? Now let us look at the other side of the equation here. For researcher Timothy Berg, is a list of Greek, I guess it says, manuscripts that contain 1 John but do not have the Comia Hanium in the text. And so manuscripts produced before the 700s. So this is Timothy Berg's list. But yeah, so when we look at this, so that'll be an interesting one to look into. 048. I might see if there's a little bit of info about this. Manuscript. Maybe comma. Okay. First article came up. Let's look at 048. Okay, so people are just mentioning it. And that's the thing. Like even when I was doing my debate on the Pericope Adulterae with Stephen Boyce, looking into that, Codex Alexandrinus doesn't have the whole section. It doesn't have like 2 chapters. So the critical text guys go, see, it's not in there. And it's like, well, you're missing those chapters. How do you know it's not in there? And so sometimes they just have something in the list, but there's way more to the story than meets the eye. So, this guy is actually a Jehovah's Witness. Now, he has the site, The Father's True Monarchy. This is the sort of site that I will go to just to see what the Contras are saying. So, a transcription of the Vatican Greek. Okay, so maybe I'll just type in 048. Codex Vaticanus Graecus. So it's got Codex Vaticanus in the title, but it's not the actual Vaticanus. It's the Graecus 2061A around the 5th century CE. And so, you can look it up on CSNTM. Maybe he's already got the pictures of it. I'll just have a quick look. Now, it looks like he's got a collation of that. So, okay. Yeah, that's the picture there. Okay. Very interesting. It's quite damaged, but perhaps it doesn't have the comma in it, but so anyway, I guess I don't want to sit here with everyone watching me and just bore everyone to tears, but I'll just put that away for later. And this is part one, so we'll go, okay, well, I looked at 048 and I found this and found that, and some of you guys might have already done this homework, and so we got Joseph Armstrong's in the house saying yo. So let's go to the next little slide here. So then he has Uncial 0296. So I'll just quickly look that one up. 0296. Manuscript comma comes up. Okay, so again, the Father's True Monarchy. This Jehovah's Witness guy is obviously against the Trinity. And was it 0296? 02. Oops, 02. So, yeah, it looks like he's got the information there. And what it's saying. So these are ones that would have to go through. But it does look like there is something missing. But sometimes what we found with the comma is you'd have the spirit, the water, and the blood. Then you'd have the communionium after it. So even if it goes through and it has the spirit, the water, and the blood, it doesn't mean that it doesn't appear afterwards. So that's got to be taken into consideration as well. So, but yeah, very interesting to look at all this sort of stuff. So this is, we've got to question everything. We've got to look at everything, and this is what true research is not just accepting what has been, fed to us on a silver platter, because sometimes it's rubbish. We know, but just listen to Bart Ehrman for 10 minutes and you'll go, that's rubbish. I listen to Bruce Metzger's conclusions and I go, that's rubbish. So we need some objective expert paleographers to come forward, and let's start a systematic reevaluation of the manuscript evidence. So some people have researcher bias, notice evidence which supports one point of view or hypothesis, objectively tends to reduce bias. So a confirmation bias, your decisions are pre-wired. And so a lot of people come to this, they come to this issue already told that the comma is a ridiculous reading. They've listened to James White say, if you believe the comma, then you don't really think that God can ever transmit his word throughout history or time. But then he'll turn around and say, the last 12 verses of Mark shouldn't be there, and they're pretty much in everything. It's like, okay, well, how can you can have that conclusion with that, but you can't have that conclusion with your own text, you know? So there's huge hypocrisy there. But yeah, so thanks, Joseph. Cheers, mate.
To come forward, and let's start a systematic re-examination of the manuscript evidence. Now, modern scholars use the argument that there are only 2 to 3 Greek manuscripts for the comma in the text, yet turn right around and ignore that same argument in holding to 2 to 3 Greek manuscripts for their shorter ending of Mark's gospel.
So it says here, critics will claim what he just said, and it says, prove it, chemically date test them. Well, we have earlier witness also even before Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So in a sense where we can show the Comma Johanneum in the early church writings before their earliest manuscripts. So wouldn't that say that they had these readings in the Bibles of the early church? So Helg says there probably should be a complete re-examination of the dating, the dates themselves, and even the science of dating with regard to Greek manuscripts. Yeah, and I remember someone pointed out that this was actually started by, it was a Roman Catholic priest who basically started the modern concept of dating to dismiss manuscripts that Protestants were using. And it seems to have stemmed from there. So he was, don't quote me, but this was like around, 1680 or something like that. He came on the scene. Maybe it was a guy called Priestley, maybe some of you guys know. But yeah, I think we should question everything, because there's been so much other stuff that's been proven to be wrong. These guys are so wrong on many things. We just can't trust them. It's a bit like, coming out of the whole COVID experience and like, who can we trust in the medical industry? Well, you go through a list and you write out a bunch of names. It's like, no, can't trust him, can't trust him. There are some people you can trust, but not everyone. And we've just got to be careful that we're not just cloaking deception in science and just thinking, well, these guys are scientists, they've got the higher ground, they're smarter than us, and we just need to accept everything they say and just go, yes, sir, like people did in COVID, and police just tackling people to the ground and throwing them on their head and punching them in the face because they don't have a mask. It's like, well, we need to think about these things and see the true science. We want true science. We're begging for real science here. We're not coming against the science, because we've seen a lot of pseudoscience. We've seen a lot of anecdotes. And when you look at people like Peter Gurry, he's sort of like, well, manuscript dating is like an art form. It's an art. It's not full, like, scientifically we've proven this. Some manuscripts have dates, that's great. Some don't. Some are just like this big. Who knows what it is? Maybe it's that someone wrote a whole book against that verse being included in the Bible, and that's the only bit that survived. You know what I mean? Like, who knows what the papyri really is? Is it sermon notes from someone half illiterate? We don't know. Joseph says, where was the science of dating when I was single? Mate, good joke there. Funny man. Joseph is in the house. So let's continue with this.
This is inconsistent, my friends. Now, what we have today is a mountain of evidence at 98% in the Latin for the verse, not even counting the church fathers. But the problem is most scholars today reject the providential hand of God in being even able to use any of the Latin for the verse. And we have to ask ourselves why. And not to be hard here, but because they really have no choice due to this mountain of witnesses for the comma, such as Codex R64, dated in the 400s to 500s, Codex 67 in the 600s, dated by Scrivener, Berger, and Metzger. We even have Codex F in the 500s. Now, it doesn't have the comma in the text, but it is Jerome's famous prologue to the epistles. where he complains about the omission of the verse in Greek manuscripts by unfaithful translators. The fact of the matter is we have multiple hundreds of both Old Latin and Vulgate witnesses. Now we need...
Okay, so that's a very important thing that I need to sort of explain. So yeah, basically in the green there, it's explained what he just said. It says Socrates of Constantinople, 380 to 439 AD, also verifies early Greek corruption of John's first epistle. So that's interesting. Then we have, I'll go through this way and I'll look at the cloud of witnesses later, but it has Fuldensis F. So this is a manuscript that was produced between 541 and 546. It testifies, I guess, it's overlaid here, but we sort of know what it says. It testifies of the comma in its prologue to the canonical epistles, saying the omission of the verse by unfaithful, I guess it's copyists or scribes, says Jerome or an Italian scribe. And so so this is a good witness for 1 John 5:7, because see, either this is actually Jerome's preface or it's an Italian scribe in 541 to 546, but it's still very old. It's only like it's not, this is very old, like compared to, they've got before the 7th century, I think it's like 4 or 5 manuscripts. So this type of information is invaluable. So this is a Latin document. Now, if it is the prologue of Jerome, this would go back, 100 years before, 150 years before, sort of thing. And what it was saying there is that unfaithful scribes were omitting the comma. So it's a very powerful witness. And Jerome talks about, Erasmus talks about the prologue of Jerome as well. So this was sort of lost in time up until recently, and they refound it. I think it was about 100 years ago. And but they've gone, oh no, it's not Jerome. So pretty much that any evidence that we're like, oh, it could be Jerome, it could actually be authentic, people are like, no, and they just sort of think that they've proven it's not. Where when you look at the information, it's like, well, that's your opinion. Perhaps it could be Jerome. And so that needs to be looked at. Scholar John Wordsworth, 1843 to 1911, English Anglican bishop, dated Codex Frisingensia R 64 at 400s to 500s. Others dated to 6th to 7th century. Many scholars date manuscripts later than they really are, if the manuscript will not favor their cause. BAM test. And so, that's what we find. People are they'll push it back a century or push it back a few centuries. And even Sinaiticus, some people on the critical text side are like, well, perhaps it's like, 600, perhaps it's 500, but they want to push that right back to 350, and we see with some of these other things, they're pushing it forward, and it's a bit of a game. It's an art form, and so whatever suits their narrative, they seem to be fudging the figures accordingly. Codex Legionensis 67, dated in the 600s by FHA Scrivener, Samuel Berger and Bruce Metzger, has the comma 1 John 5:7. So this is all very interesting information. So early Latin witnesses. Okay. So here it has a great cloud of witnesses. Tertullian, is that 115? I think it is. Cyprian, 250. Eusebius, Vercelli, 370. Priscillian, 380 AD. 460 bishops in 484. I think I said 418 bishops, so maybe I'm wrong there. Fuldensis, Well, this says Fulgenitus, so I think it's a different manuscript or a different person. 495, Athanasius, 350, Gregory, 380, and it's got a few other church writers there, so very interesting. Multiple hundreds of both Old Latin and Vulgate witnesses time clock, and so a little bit of a thing there. But we just see, like, the Roman Catholics, they were like, well, it's only the Latin, and it appears in their Latin premier Bible of the Clementine Vulgate. The Comma Johanneum is there, and so the Protestants and the Catholics were in agreement that that was there. And so it just seems like people who are following a text that was helped to be formulated with Westcott and Hort by Unitarians, and the Bible Society had been basically, the Trinitarian Bible Society had to be started for Trinitarians. So it gives you a bit of an idea of what the Bible Societies became like. Became sort of like the Unitarian Bible Society. And a lot of the verses to do with the Trinity are removed and or distorted or changed and manipulated so you can't really read the Trinity in a lot of these verses. And so anyway, let's continue on. So Joseph Armstrong says the art of manipulating evidence. Yes. So we don't want to manipulate the evidence. We don't want to bring it forward or backwards. And what I've noticed here is they're clearly saying that this Fulgensis, yeah, it could be Jerome, but even if it isn't, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll just say, or an Italian scribe. But it is that date. So it could be like 150 years earlier, and this could just be a copy of it. But what we see with Fulgensis, I'll just let you know this, it's talking about the comma is taken out by unfaithful scribes in some manuscripts, but then that manuscript itself doesn't have 1 John 5:7 in it. So that's very interesting, because sometimes what you see is people would copy a text from other places, but a commentary they'll copy from somewhere else. So sometimes a commentary and a text were separate, sometimes they were all together, but sometimes you'll see a difference in the commentary and you'll see a difference in the text. And so this is why a lot of the time Erasmus was looking for commentaries that were ancient, that were old, because sometimes they would have a completely different reading to what was commonly known in the text. And so you could have an error creep into the text, but it might still have that original reading in a commentary somewhere.
We have multiple hundreds of both Old Latin and Vulgate witnesses. Now we need to ask a question tonight. Is the Lord's hand shortened that it cannot use the Latin and other languages in the preservation of his word? Where does the scripture command us, saying, thou shalt use the Greek alone? Even our Lord had a sign written over him. This is the King of the Jews, written in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, of which languages are omitted in the modern Bibles, by the way, at Luke 23:38. You might want to get your apparatuses out on that one. Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and other languages were used by God during his divine providential process. And to the scholars, I say, yes, God does work in that way, even in an English translation, if that is what God wanted to do. And millions of believers the world over believe that is exactly what God chose to do. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people. Isaiah 28:9-13. Now, due to early Greek corruptions of 1 John 5.
So I think that's pretty self-explanatory up until then, so I won't repeat what's been said. It just says here, 1 John 5:7 is not a Latin edition, but rather a correction of corrupted Greek text. Thank God for it. So it's interesting. If God cannot preserve his word into a translation, then half of the book of Daniel and parts of Ezra are not inspired in the Hebrew, for it was first inspired in Aramaic and later translated into Hebrew. Consider that. So
7 by the Gnostics, Sabellians, and Arians, God did use the Old Latin and even the Vulgate to a degree to preserve his word. As Charles Forster said, the Latin evidences will hang about their necks like millstones to the end of time.
Okay, so there's a little bit there that I might read. Ambrose of Milan, 339 AD to 397 AD, accused the Arians of having mutilated the scriptures during their reign. And so you can see that's a letter to Gibbons there. A few examples of early 1 John corruptions. 1 John 2:23. It's not in the majority. The majority of Greek manuscripts omit, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also in the majority text. We see that sometimes the Latin can be a reliable witness in preserving Trinity readings when the majority of Greek manuscripts do not. The Old Latin Vulgate, slash Vulgate, so there's a difference between the Old Latin and the Vulgate. So basically Old Latin is just additions that were before the Vulgate, can at times preserve readings that the Greek has lost by corruption. The Western Church was less affected than the Greek Church with early Gnostic teachings. So that's by Frederick Nolan. And so 1 John 4:9, 5:6, 5:8, and 5:13. Both 1 John 5:6, 5:8, and 5:13 show early corruptions. The latter part of 1 John 5:13 reads, "And that ye may believe on the name of the Son of God," which is omitted in the critical text, but is supported by the majority text and the Textus Receptus. 1 John 4:9, the only begotten Son, omitted or changed with 0 manuscript support. Okay, that's interesting. 1 John 4:19, we love him, God, Sinaiticus, with him, God, omitted in modern versions, even with TR Byzantine and much manuscript support. John 1:18, Gnostic reading of only begotten God in the LSB, NASB 95. So we talked about that earlier. Gnostics have been messing with the word begotten from the beginning. So all you have to do is read Origin, and he has a whole section on the only begotten God and talking about that. 1 John 4:3, which spirit tested. Modern versions omit Jesus, Christ is come in the flesh in 1 John 4:3, revealing the spirit behind them is not of God. Even Codex Sinaiticus 01 has the Lord is come in the flesh, along with the Byzantine majority and the Textus Receptus and a lot of manuscript support. The sleight of hand will say 1 John 4:2 has the phrase, but it is still omitted with no justification other than early Gnostic corruption. Try telling a wounded vet he still has one arm left. Try telling God, no big deal. Yeah, it's we want all the words of God. And so in a lot of these places, when you examine these and you go right in depth, you can see there is a lot of strange, bizarre reasons why they adopt one reading and not the next. But most of the time they're following Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. And when you understand that these two don't agree with each other, that they're so different, Hoskias said that there was over 3,000 differences just in the Gospels alone. And so that's a lot of differences. So let's continue.
To a degree to preserve his word. As Charles Forster said, the Latin evidences will hang about their necks like millstones to the end of time. This is why critics of 1 John 5:7 must make their own set of criteria, such as the Latin criteria box when it comes to the hundreds of Latin Father and Latin manuscript witnesses for the comma. Thou shalt use the Greek alone, for the Latin is bad, they say. No matter how many pieces of evidence we show them, the critics instinctively default to ad hoc mode and begin scrambling to move the goalpost. They make their own rules and then expect our arguments to fit into their criteria boxes, and in most cases without even hearing the counter evidence. Now, criteria for the verbatim criteria box, in that if a church father or any manuscript reading of 1 John 5:7 does not quote or read identical word for word and in perfect order, as if it's coming right out of a King James Bible, then it is null and void. I mean, really, who makes these rules up? Now,
Okay, so we'll go back here a little bit. Okay. So think outside the box. And so I'm pretty sure most of that just got read. But actually, no, I don't think it all did. Let's have a look. So they've got the Latin criteria box. When it comes to hundreds of Latin father and Latin manuscript witnesses of the comma, thou shalt use the Greek alone, for the Latin is bad, they say. No matter how many pieces of evidence we show them, the critics instinctively default to ad hoc mode and begin scrambling to move the goalposts. They make their own rules and then expect our arguments to fit into their criteria boxes, and in most cases without even hearing the counter evidence of Proverbs 18:13. The favorite criteria box of the critics is the verbatim criteria box. So that was mentioned with, I think, Peter Gurry. That if a church father or manuscript reading of 1 John 5:7 does not quote or read identical word for word in perfect order, as if coming right out of the King James Bible, that it's null and void. Who makes these rules up? So I think it's a very good point here. And so we've got two issues that it's just, we've got so much information in Latin that it shouldn't be ignored. Now, I came to the conclusion one time when I was doing my studies on 1 John 5:7, I thought, I wonder how many manuscripts they would need to accept the comma. And I thought, okay, so there's 500 Greek manuscripts. There's only a handful that have the comma, and only a few of them are in the text. So a lot of it's in the margin, okay? So you got 500 manuscripts. So if we had 250 manuscripts with the reading, would they accept it? No. If we had 480 manuscripts with the reading in it, would they accept it? No. If we got right to the point where there was only 2 manuscripts that didn't have the comma, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, would they accept the reading? No. So they're not interested in the majority text thing. They follow Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And we see this in the last 12 verses of Mark. 12 verses, not just one verse. 12 verses deleted because Vaticanus and Sinaiticus against all the church. And so doesn't this show you that they're actually from outside of the church coming in and saying, we're imposing these manuscripts upon you. We know that the evidence is everywhere, but we want to only look at these. And so it's a bit like if you get, I've got a 10-cent piece here from Australia. So it's got a picture of a nice peacock on one side, and it's got the Queen's head. She's passed away now, on the other. Now, if I get that 10-cent coin and I hold it right up there, what can I see? Hardly anything but that 10 cents. So they've got Vaticanus and Sinaiticus like this, and that's how they make their textual choices. All the rest of this stuff, they are not concerned about the majority text. Now, I know apologists use this type of argumentation and say, well, what about the embarrassment of riches? This is Dan Wallace's favorite thing. All these manuscripts, we've got so many manuscripts out there. And so if you're an atheist, you're like, wow, they've got all this evidence. So you go to church and then you're like, okay, Mr. Wallace, so where's all this embarrassment of riches you're talking about? Well, 99% of it, see the majority text there, Byzantine text, just throw that in the bin. If you follow that, you're a modern day Marcionite. That's what he said. You're a modern day Marcionite if you're a majority text guy. That's what Dan Wallace said. So, but just follow Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, But these two disagree with each other in all these places. And so I want to read something by Hoskier. I know I'm sort of diverting. I just want to make sure that I've got it here. And this is quite amazing. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to have to go 3,000. Nope. Maybe I should leave that alone for a little bit because it does seem to be messing with the flow. So, so it says here, an ad hoc argument is a fallacious rhetorical strategy that's common and often hard to spot among the critical text camp. It occurs when the scholar's claims are threatened with counter evidence, so they create a rationale to dismiss the counter evidence, hoping to protect their original claim. And so it does have writing down the bottom here, but it's pretty hard for me to read that. Maybe if I let it.
This is why critics of 1 John 5:7 must make their own set of criteria, such as the Latin criteria box when it comes to the hundreds of Latin.
Okay, so yeah, the Latin criteria box. So if it comes from the Latin, it's bad. Latin, bad. Greek, good. Now, I understand we want everything to be in the Greek, but at the end of the day, sometimes we can see the evidence of it being in the Greek from the early church witnesses, from the Latin translations of the Greek, and so we can see the something that's no longer there. We have evidence that something was translated from the Greek. So they just want to stick to the Latin, and so this is what we sort of found James Snapp doing in his argumentation. He wouldn't really move from that position.
Father and Latin manuscript witnesses for the comma. Thou shalt use the Greek alone, for the Latin is bad, they say. No matter how many pieces of evidence we show them, the critics instinctively default to ad hoc mode and begin scrambling to move the goalpost. They make their own rules and then expect our arguments to fit into their criteria boxes, and in most cases without even hearing the counter evidence. Now, the favorite criteria box for the critics is the verbatim criteria box.
Okay, so we have Peter Gurry, and he says here, you realize that all manuscripts of 1 John 5 include verses 7 to 8 in them, right? This includes the manuscripts that lack the Johannine comma. So if you want to show that a church father quoted the Johannine comma, you must show that they quoted the Johannine comma itself and not just other parts of these verses in all manuscripts have. And so they're sort of creating their own criteria. And so when you have like Cyprian saying these three are one, they're like, oh, well, it can't be the comma. So it has to be like a commentary on, say, 1 John 5:8. That's what he's doing. And so he's saying these three are one. That's just a commentary on 1 John 5:8 to do with the Trinity somehow. And so they've sort of got a bit of an anecdote for every single scenario. And so let's just continue.
In that if a church father or any manuscript reading of 1 John 5:7 does not quote or read identical word for word and in perfect order, as if it's coming right out of a King James Bible, then it is null and void. I mean, really, who makes these rules up? Now, the dating of Greek manuscripts,
Okay, so I saw a little bit of a thing that just popped up there. I want to try and grab it.
Really, who makes these rules up? Now, the dating of Greek manuscript void. I mean, really, who makes these rules up? Now,
okay, 3 bear witness in heaven. To fit the narrative, critics want all Greek manuscripts to be later than Erasmus and all Latin manuscripts to be after Jerome. we will debunk this narrative tonight. Okay. Martin, margin details, vowel points. Sorry, I think it's a name there, but it's behind this stuff here. And I might actually get this comment down. Sorry about that. Mentioned by F. Montfortican, who of all men living is most capable to judge these matters, he said in the 5th book of the Paleographica Graeca that this manner of marking is above 1,000 years old. Okay, so that's interesting. So let's move on to the next.
Now, the dating of Greek manuscripts leaves way too much room for speculation. Without BAM chemical date testing of the ink, everything is educated guesswork. Codex 61 is a perfect example, as I brought up before, which has 1 John 5:7 in the text. Forster said Michaelis and Porson never saw Codex 61 in person, yet both dogmatically pronounced it to be a manuscript of the 16th century. Now, Adam Clark, who is no friend of 1 John 5:7, by the way, yet he was profoundly versed in the technical study of ancient manuscripts and the evidence of their handwritings, was at least honest enough to date Codex 61 at 1272, after he examined it in person twice with hands-on. Now, French theologian David Martin shows Codex 61 being even earlier in the late 11th century and coming from an even earlier authority. Now, regarding the ancient textual variation marks, these are the umlauts, the dots in Codex Vaticanus that you see right on the screen there if you look at 1 John 5:7. Even Dr. White says, we don't know what the dating of these dots is. Well, there you go. More the reason to chemically date test them. In actuality, we do know some of the 800 dots were tested as original with spectral analysis. Now, I'm in agreement 100% with Dr. Maurice Robinson on the confirmation bias of modern scholars when it comes to these ancient textual variation markers. I'm telling you, my friends, when it comes to the manuscript evidence, we must assume nothing, and start questioning everything.
Okay, so there's quite a lot there that I want to get into, but I want to catch up on some of the comments because we don't want that to all run away from us. So A. Hannah says, the hand wave defense against non-narrative supporting material is quite effective in the critical text camp. Yeah, just wave your hands, just go like this, and that means the evidence has been changed. And so they can have a double standard. They can have the 12 verses of Mark deleted because of 2 manuscripts. But and when they look at the comma, they're like, oh, you guys, look at all the majority text. They're all of a sudden really fascinated with the majority text. And I can't understand why they do that. I do understand why they do it, but it's a double standard. So Derek McClure says, really enjoying learning about the Latin side of the evidence in regards to defending some of these KJV minority readings. Thanks again for providing some more clarity on this topic, Nick. Great job. Cheers, Derek. I'm glad you're enjoying the series that I've been doing. Joseph Armstrong says, didn't the Roman Catholic Church ban removing the comma? They might have. I don't know much about that. And so, but perhaps they did. It was a very strong verse. And so one of the things is Luther, he used earlier editions of Erasmus. So he didn't include it. And he sort of spoke against it and said it shouldn't be in there. But then Erasmus came full circle and went, no, it should be in there. Absolutely should be in there. But I think because they were debating about free will and all the rest of it, I think that Martin Luther sort of went with his own conclusion on that and kept it out. So I guess being a Roman Catholic in those days and believing in the Trinity, that would have been seen as a pretty big thing. But then Erasmus has come full circle and put it in there. So, but the ramifications of his first 2 editions not having it in there, and not because of Erasmus, but he was simply saying well, I need evidence. And as we can see, this has been attacked in the Greek. And so he was pretty much showing he was doing a Greek edition. And doesn't this go against the narrative that Erasmus, all he was doing, like say in the book of Revelation, he was just back translating from the Latin here, there, and everywhere. It doesn't make any sense, doesn't it? Why didn't he just back translate from the Latin on the Commuhenian? He copped a lot of flack for not having it in his first two editions, and he was like, hey, I'm just going with the evidence that's before me. Well, people say, oh, no, he back translated from the Latin in the book of Revelation and all this sort of stuff. There was one tiny little bit at the end of the book of Revelation. He said that he back translated a few words. Then 250 years later, Franz Delitzsch found this manuscript that had Reuchlin's name on it. And he's like, this is the one that Erasmus used. How does he know that? Reuchlin was a manuscript collector. He used to collect manuscripts. He could have had 6 or 7 editions of Andreas's commentary. We've got like 200 today that are still extant. So there's quite a lot of these manuscripts. And who's to say that he didn't have a few of these with his name on them? So because it was missing the whole last page of 6 complete verses, they then say, oh, Erasmus lied. It wasn't a few words. It was actually like 136 words. And it's like, no, it wasn't. Read Erasmus. Just go through what Erasmus himself said. And clearly, if he was lying like that, all Reuchlin could just go, sorry, Erasmus, you're lying. And just totally discredit Erasmus in his day. All it would take is the people in the print shop to go, well, it's not a few words, Erasmus. This is quite a lot, just someone to whistle blow. But it took 250 years later, Franz Delitzsch, who was against the Textus Receptus. Now, he was an interesting Hebrew scholar, but him and Tregegels, he was German, Tregegels was English, so he translated it into English. And this was one of the main reasons why people started coming against the Textus Receptus back in the day. So this is about like 1850, 1860 sort of region. And they started to come against the TR and say, see, Erasmus can't be trusted. He said he only amended a few words. And see, he said he amended a few words, and he said, get that information from the Aldine guys, and he mentioned it in his annotations. Then in the other 4 editions that he did, the annotations are silent there because they fixed it. So there's a whole bunch of conspiracy nuttery around that. And I'll call it out for what it is. It's conspiracy nuttery. And when you hear James White get on his program and say, oh, Erasmus tricked himself. He thought that he'd fixed the problem, but he didn't. And he actually used the Aldine edition, and he never corrected it because the Aldine edition was his own edition. So it's like this circular thing. And so it just has, basically just get the Three Stooges and just have one of those scenes, and Erasmus is right in the middle, like, get someone slapping him on his bald head sort of thing. And he's slipping on banana peels. He's, people are running around the scriptorium and slipping over, and just, it's just a big joke. And oftentimes James White will mention this in a debate, and people will laugh on cue. It's like, he sometimes he even says it wrong, but people still laugh because they're so used to laughing at that on cue. But it's just rubbish. It's just not, the facts say different. And so Bible Version Conspiracy said, if the Roman Church added the comma, there should be evidence. So the Roman Catholic Church, they were only using Latin manuscripts. So it's in 98% of all Latin manuscripts. So that's what they were going with there. TurretinFan asks, do you agree with Snapp about the absence of Greek articles showing back translation in several manuscripts? I guess I'm not 100% sold on it, but I think it could be a possibility that if it, like as I mentioned in, Codex, the 1300s Codex that we looked at before, it's not on this picture here, but we see that the articles were were absent. But say, for example, if you go to my website, I've got tons of information on my website there. Now I'll try and find, maybe I've got it up here already. Textus Receptus. No, I'll just have to reopen it. tr.org.au. We'll go to my main page and we'll scroll down to 1 John 5:7. Index of Comma Johanneum articles. Now, if we go to Joseph Bryannius, so Joseph Bryannius, so he died in 1432. Okay, so it's like 100 years before Erasmus died. So he could have written his work, in the year 1400. It could have been in 1370. So it could have been anywhere between them. I'm not really that sure. Okay, but when you compare his work to Scrivener, say we look at verse 7 and 8 here, it's identical except for the Holy Spirit. It has pneuma to agion, so it just says spirit the Holy, where here it has kai to agion pneuma, but it's identical, even with all the pointings and everything, even with the definite article. So before the Father, the Word, and definite article Holy Spirit, and so yeah, it's quite interesting. And so when you look at this information, this is Greek evidence that is not, yes, it's not a biblical manuscript, but it's certainly a Greek writer. And this Greek writer has written this, and it's pretty much identical to Scrivener. If we look at Manuel Calicus, look at what he has to say. So this is all on my website. Manuel Calicus, if you look at compared to Scrivener, and remember, this isn't just quoting chunks of verses, it's alluding to things, saying, oh, this is like this verse, and just like we would look at any church writer. So some of it is not there when it has entu eranu, so in the heavens. So it has, there are three that bear record: hopato, hologos, kaitu, pneuma, to agion. So when we compare that to Scrivener, we see the hoti is not there. So that's just basically the for or because. Entu eranu, so in the heaven, so it has pater, hologos, kaitu, agion, pneuma. So we see that the Holy Spirit, sometimes it has Spirit Holy or Holy Spirit, but it's got all the definite articles there. And so what year was this in? Well, he died in 1410. So this is the thing. You got to look at all the information, not just, okay, well, this is a Greek manuscript, because sometimes we're looking at lectionaries, sometimes we're looking at minuscules, sometimes we're looking at unctuals. We're looking at everything. We're looking at Latin. We're looking at these Greek writers, and so we've just got to be careful that we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because he's just two people who lived quite a long time before the Complutensian or Erasmus, and they've got all the definite articles in there, pretty much identical to Scrivener. So where are they getting these readings from? And so all of that's got to be taken into consideration. And so, okay, I'll drop that one down. Now, I did find what I was looking for, which was my little sidetrack. So let me read this for you. Hermann Hoskia. Now, I don't necessarily have to side myself with Hermann Hoskia. Hermann Hoskia did at one stage consult a clairvoyant to find out the provenance of a manuscript. I disagree with that. I think that's just as bad as what Westcott and Hort were doing. But at the end of the day, he did do a lot of interesting work that both sides of the debate would look at and say, wow, that's very interesting. So Hermann Hoskier, who meticulously collated B and Aleph, so Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and a host of other manuscripts in the early 20th century, actually documented over 3,000 differences between B and Aleph in the Gospels alone. For they are on record, which I have. So this is from Scott Jones's book, The Magic of Evolutionism and Bible Versions, or something like that. It's, if you look up Scott Jones and type in Magic Evolutionism, you'll get there. 3,000 differences between B and Aleph in the Gospels alone, but Hoskier did these two manuscripts a favor by only documenting the 3,000 plus differences. For Hoskier likewise enumerated and omitted 17 different categories of differences, which he didn't tabulate. Those differences, while very much real, were slightly less significant than the other categories of differences, and thus had Hoskier tabulated and documented all of the real actual differences between B and Aleph, only in the Gospels alone, mind you, then the number would have been simply staggering, as in many times more than the 3,000 plus differences between B and Aleph in the Gospels alone. That is also a matter of plain, empirical, verifiable fact. However, the ostrich has nothing on the modern biblical textual critic. For a few, at least, of the magicians of the critical text are aware of this phenomenon, documented by Burgon, Hoskier, and others, but like the ostrich, they ignore it. They ignore this actual, empirical, verifiable evidence with its searing implications, just like the evolutionist ignores the searing implications of the sudden disappearance of highly complex anthropods in the Cambrian explosion, albeit in the same way as the evolutionist employs cladistical analysis and other contrived mechanisms to make these searing implications magically disappear, poof. So the modern magicians of the critical text do the exact same thing, for in the mere blink of an eye, those thousands and thousands of differences between B and Aleph suddenly vanish into thin air. Presto, changeo, gone. And so, yeah, he sort of adds his little thing at the end there, but it's very interesting that Hoskier, if he applied these other 17 different categories of differences, it would have been a staggering amount of difference. So this is B and Aleph, the main manuscripts that they're saying, oh, these are the oldest and best. They don't even agree with each other. So you've got one that's chalk, one that's cheese, one that's oil, one that's water, and they've mixed them. If you stir it around fast enough, you might get them to mix for a while. But when it all settles, and even Will Kinney was talking about this on the Standing for Truth program the other day, mentioning the differences or the silly readings in Sinaiticus. Why weren't these copied? Why weren't they translated from? They were just simply lost in time. Now they've been exalted as the best, but they're not. So A. Hannah says, great point. Erasmus was diligent to not include the Johannine comma without evidence, but then added it because of evidence. Hence the rash wages story invention of hundreds of years of character assassination. Yeah, and so he was going by evidence, where the critical text guys say that, in the book of Revelation, he was just back translating from the Latin and all this other stuff, where at the end of the day, so I'm just looking at someone's written Write the Vision Ministry. This is Friday, April 26th, not the 3rd of May. Mike and I are available. Yeah, sorry about that. I actually put it up when I first started the video because it was 10 minutes before that I did the upload to StreamYard, and then I realized it was a wrong date. So I did mention that at the beginning of this video, but obviously I can't just stop it and spend 10 minutes changing it. So I will fix that. So anyway, I do have the correct dates, but just not on YouTube yet. So I'll fix that. That's actually the date that I've got Phil Stringer coming on. So what I did is I used the same sort of thing that Phil Stringer had and just sort of changed a few pictures here. here and there. So hopefully you like the picture of the explosion in the background, because I think this documentation is explosive to the critical text camp. We are blowing up the academy. People are learning more and more about the comma, something which, in the Greek, there's not a huge amount of evidence for, but we are showing that even in those cases, we have so much evidence, because we don't just go by one witness. The Bible says out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, we go by those. And so we look at everything. This is the thing. Some people are just looking at scanty, fragmentary things. We look at absolutely everything. And so we also have a very powerful witness, internal witness, with the grammatical issues. So we'll look at that. So we've already gone for about 3 hours. So I'm not sure how long my voice will hold out, but I'll continue to go along. So A. Hannah says he knows this, Mike. He said he would correct it. It was a scribal error. Yes, that's very good. It's almost like poetic justice, isn't it? I made a scribal error. Sorry about that, guys. Right, the Vision Ministry says I'll be metal detecting Florida beaches for the 1715 wrecks on that day. Wow, really cool. I've often thought about metal detecting where I'm at, because it's a big tourist area, and I reckon I could find rings and all sorts of things on the beach around here. But anyway, thank you, A. Hannah. So so that's good that you guys know that, because there's nothing worse than making a video and it's got wrong information, and you're like, how do I let people know? But you guys know now. I'll fix that date. And so I think it does say on the actual thing what it is. Where are we? Resolution debates. It says on the actual picture what the date is, but not on YouTube. Yeah, it says live in 8 days. So obviously it says join us Friday, May the 3rd. So that's not in 8 days. So yeah, I've just got to fix that a little bit up. So but yeah, I'm hoping that you like the picture. Big nuclear explosion. So here's James White down here, Mark Ward, and Carlo Martini's there. He's probably burning in hell, but absolutely explosive material. And so we're going to be talking about that. So I'm really looking forward to that. So let's go back to here now that I'm caught up with the comments, and we'll look back at what this is saying.
Doom nothing.
Page where it has the dating of Codex Montfortianus, and it's 1520, which is quite amazing. Like who dates these things? Okay, so we see, Greek man. I'm pretty sure this is Wikipedia, and so it does have Codex Ottobonianus. So that, like TurretinFan was asking the question before, and saying, do you agree with Snapp about the absence of Greek articles showing a back translation in several manuscripts? So I guess I'm not that sure. I'm not a Latin expert, and I'm not that expert in Greek to understand the lack of articles, if it does come from a translation from the Latin. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't really matter a huge amount if it's back translated from Latin or or it's Greek. It is an old witness, and so but obviously we would want our Greek manuscripts to come from earlier Greek manuscripts, so that would be the most favorable thing. Now, so this is Wikipedia. So the 1520 date of Codex Montfortianus is often brought up by people like Dan Wallace and James White. So Codex 61, Adam Clark, so he dated it to 1272. And he said he examined the manuscript himself. And though I thought it to be comparatively modern, Yet I had no doubt that it existed before the invention of printing, and it was never written as an intention to deceive. In comparing the writing of Codex Montforti or Montfortianus with different specimens given by Montfaucon in the Paleographa Graeca, it appears to approach nearest to the page 320, number 4, which was taken from one of the Colbert manuscripts, number 845, written in the year of our Lord 1272, which I'm led to think may be nearly about the date of Codex Montfortianus. So he's clear, Adam Clark, he saw the manuscript, so he's dating it to then. If you have read Adam Clark's commentary, he's no friend of the Textus Receptus in many places. And the King James, sometimes he's just outright saying that it shouldn't read that because the Syriac says this or something else. And so, but he's clearly unbiasedly just saying, well, I date it to 1272. So that has to be taken into consideration, because Adam Clark, he was a respected scholar in his day. So we have to think about what he's saying. So then we have the omelettes. So some people say it's from the 4th century, some people say it's from the 16th century. So these are the dots that appear in many of the verses that are changed from the Textus Receptus. So this is quite interesting. So this has been looked at recently by this guy. We'll get him up. Nehemiah Gordon. And I might type in Vaticanus as well. And so, yeah, if you type in Nehemiah Gordon, or he calls himself Nehemiah, so I've got to stop calling him Nehemiah. I actually want to get him on the show to talk about Revelation 16:5. So, but he's pretty hard to contact. I keep contacting him on YouTube and his email, but they just keep sending me their regular sort of updates and things like that. So, yeah, so this has been, I know that's Dr. Payne. So yeah, so this is one of the things that he has examined these, and so Dwayne Green has talked about this quite a bit, and so yeah, I just sort of mentioned that anyway. So that's Nehemiah Gordon, and so these are the dots there. So let's continue.
Before, which has 1 John 5:7 in the text. Forster said Michaelis and Porson never saw Codex 61 in person.
So Michaelis, he was a Russian text critic. I think he studied in Berlin for a while. Porson, I know Stephen Avery calls him like a drunk. But yeah, Porson was very sarcastic, very poisonous in his debate tactics. So I'm not just trying to do ad hom with Porson, but that's what Stephen Avery says about him. I don't really know that much about him. I know he wrote books against the comma. So they never saw Codex Montfortianus in person, yet they both dogmatically pronounced it to be a manuscript of the 16th century. So they're saying the date's like 1520. But Adam Clark was very clear. He saw it. He had his hands on the manuscript, said it was about 1272. David Martin, I guess French theologian David Martin, I wonder if that's the Martin translation of the French Bible. I'm pretty sure there's a Martin translation. Shows evidence of 61 being even earlier in the late 11th century and coming from an even earlier authority. So Forster, so he's a comma advocate probably about 200 years ago. He said we must choose between the presumptuous dogmas of ignorance and the patient deductions of knowledge. And so very, very well written that. I'm enjoying these slides. This is like getting, our meat served up on a silver platter here. I'm really enjoying this. And so I guess in a way, This is an answer to Dwayne Green's comment saying, oh, it was really hard to sit through the debate and see all the information. I guess it's for times like this for people to go back through these and reread them and contemplate all the evidence. Because when you look at how much evidence these guys have on the comma, there's so much that they could probably do, 50 debates. When I went through and spent 3 months on the comma, I really felt like we could have a team of like 50 people constantly working for a whole year and still not get all the information about the comma. There's just so much information about the comma, which really shows you that it has existed before Erasmus. People like Erasmus sort of invented it, sort of thing. I know, like, you'd have to be pretty, lowbrow to say that, but it does get said,
Person. Yet both dogmatically pronounced it to be a manuscript of the 16th century. Now, Adam Clark, who was no friend of 1 John 5:7, by the way, yet he was profoundly versed in the technical study of ancient manuscripts and the evidence of their handwritings, was at least honest enough to date Codex 61 at 1272, after he examined it in person twice with hands-on. Now, French theologian David Martin shows Codex 61 being even earlier in the late 11th century and coming from an even earlier authority.
So it says here the prologues of Greek Archbishop Thylact of Orchid in 61, Thylact of 1050 to 1107, 11th century. So that's interesting. So it's got the writings of this guy in it. So it can date back to this time, which is very interesting.
Now, regarding the ancient textual variation marks, these are the umlauts, the dots in Codex Vaticanus that you see right on the screen there if you look at 1 John 5:7.
So I agree with Dr. Robinson on the confirmation bias of modern scholars on the dots in B. So this is Maurice Robinson. It looks like it's in the ETC blog by the looks of the little logo there. Since I have no dog in this fight over umlauts, in that my position is not affected in any particular manner, nor do I concur with Payne's interpretations in most instances, let me offer a few observations to close out 2023. When I see those who crow the loudest when discussing the Rabin-Gordon results, so that's Nehemiah Gordon, the recent results that they had. So I guess that's going back, 2023. So that's 6 months. I'm saying like 2 or 3 months ago. So time's flying. It's nearly May. Smacks of strongly of confirmation bias. In the sense that these vocal proponents all had made up their minds long ago, years before their scientific testing had occurred, having disagreed from the start with the various Payne Cannot attempts at various visual and microscope-based forms of his investigation. Okay, so I didn't realize that there was, this quite a big pushback with those findings of Rabin and Gordon. So that's an interesting thing that I really have to come up to speed with. So regarding the ancient textual variation markers, the umlauts, dots in Vaticanus on the screen here at 1 John 5:7, even Mr. White says we do not know what the dating of these dots is. 1245 response to Mr. De Soto's 1 John 5:7 defense. There you go. I might actually have to look that defense up because I know De Soto did a video about Georgios Babiniotis, so I wonder if it was that one, because I don't really listen to James White much anymore. He's sort of become a bit of a Ben Shapiro sort of guy, and so there you go. More the reason to chemically date test them. Actually, we do know some of the 800 dots were tested as original with spectral analysis. I agree with Philip Payne in that the 3 dots here, instead of the typical 2 dots representing ancient variations, is ascribed, whether earlier or later, seeing the 3 heavenly witness, Father, Word, and Holy Ghost, and these 3 are 1 in verse 7. No, chemically date test the dots. Okay, so very interesting. So yeah, I'll have to come up to speed with what's happened with those chemical tests, or whether they were chemical tests. You know, I thought that that's what they had done. So, but I know Nehemiah Gordon is becoming more and more popular in the circles of textual criticism, which is quite interesting because his whole concept on Jehovah being the name of God, which is a TRKJV sort of position, and also the whole concept of the etymology of Jehovah being the 3 I ams, the past, present, and the future, which is the verse in Revelation 16:5, the one which is and was and shalt be, art and wast and shalt be in the King James. It's very interesting to go through his material, and so he's just going to become more and more famous, and people are going to look at more and more of his work. So I think that's going to help our cause quite a fair bit, specifically with Revelation 16:5. So, but let's continue.
Even Dr. White says, we don't know what the dating of these dots is. Well, there you go. More the reason to chemically date test them. In actuality, we do know some of the 800 dots were tested as original with spectral analysis. Now, I'm in agreement 100% with Dr. Maurice Robinson on the confirmation bias of modern scholars when it comes to these ancient textual variation markers. I'm telling you, my friends, when it comes to the manuscript evidence, we must assume nothing, and start questioning everything. You would think after the academic farce of the first century of Mark that scholars would all be in favor of chemical date testing, but they are not. If the critics are so sure about the dating of manuscripts, then please stop with the excuses and chemically date test them. What are they so afraid of? The Dead Sea Scrolls were carbon-14 date tested just fine, and we have less invasive procedures today. So if my scholar friends out there want to put an end to the conspiracy theories regarding the dating of manuscripts, especially Alpha and B, then please, it is really time to put your money where your mouth is and prove it. Now, Latin professor.
Okay, so that's a very good point, because Stephen Avery, myself, many people have been calling for the chemical test to be done on Codex Sinaiticus, and I think everything should be tested rather than just like an art form. We should be looking at everything, and so I would say, yeah, absolutely, Sinaiticus should be tested. So when we read through this, it says about Bart Ehrman, you would think after the academic farce, Ehrman, of the first century of Marr, that scholars would be in favor of chemical date testing, but they're not. Still excuses. So what we saw was Dan Wallace. He was in a debate with Bart Ehrman, and he thought he'd get him on a gotcha moment where he said, well, I know a scholar who's got a first century copy of Mark. And so he brought this up, and then it eventually turned into nothing. And it was a huge fiasco. And at the end of the day, basically, Dan Wallace had to sort of apologize, and it just looked really bad because, obviously the atheists they're going for Bart Ehrman, and they see this, Christian guy, jump through these hoops and try to say that, we've got all this evidence, and he doesn't have it. It just looked really bad for the Christian community at large. And so it says here, Bart Ehrman blog, if the critics are so sure about the dating of manuscripts, then stop with the excuses and chemically date test them. What are they so afraid of? And we ask the same thing. Why don't they do that? And so the thing is, usually if you're guilty, if I've done a murder, I don't want the police reinvestigating something that I've done. It's like, keep them away. Don't let them come to my house. But if I've got nothing to hide, I'm like, yeah, please, if I want to find the real killer, I'm like, please investigate, do whatever you have to do, get more people on the job. I'll personally fund private investigators to figure out what's happening. But you see, the critical text guys are not that interested in getting these things tested, because I think what they're going to find is a lot of these, this artwork, this guesswork is wrong. And people have been dating these things wrongly for many years. So it says here, this is not the 1st century papyrus fragment of the Gospel of Mark. And so, so it was proven wrong. So 2427, it says, I'll just read the highlighted bits here. Or I'll read what I can. It says, that is why they tested it scientifically. The same cannot be said of Sinaiticus. The experts do not notice anything suspicious about it. That's why they have never been tested scientifically. There is no credible doubt to its authenticity, and therefore no need to spend time, money, resources doing it, especially when it could damage the manuscript. Chemical testing is not free. It requires specialist equipment and personnel, and it requires their time. Daniels gives 4 sub-points to this fact, to which I reply, Sinaiticus has never been chemically tested. I just explained why. So I'm pretty sure that's Elijah Hixson maybe talking about that. And so I remember reading this. I think even Elijah Hixson in our back and forward on Facebook, I was saying, well, they need to chemically test things. And he was sort of saying the same thing. Well, you actually damage the manuscript when you do that. I mean, Sinaiticus is huge. It wouldn't take much just to, grab some ink scrapings and to, get into the manuscript and find out, what exactly it is. And as I've mentioned many times before about archaic mark. So archaic mark, I might even just quickly get my website up with this one. So I think I've got my website open here. So if archaic mark, oops, full dyslexia there. Minuscule 2427. So yeah, that's the one that they're talking about. So archaic mark, it was proven to be a forgery. And so basically they were saying it was a text that had the readings of Vaticanus in it. And the aliens, they loved this manuscript. They thought it was fantastic. And so they were oftentimes mentioning this manuscript that, has these Vaticanus readings in it. But then it had, they found out it had Prussian blue ink in it, which is from 1704 only. So it wasn't a 13th century manuscript like they thought. So if the top-notch scholars like the aliens can be deceived about a manuscript and how old it is, surely they should just chemical test everything, shouldn't they? Why are they just going, well, there's no one's sus about, because people were already a little bit sus on this manuscript. They were like, we're thinking that it could be a forgery, so that's why they tested it. And then they're saying, well, if no one's sus on Sinaiticus, we shouldn't test it. So pretty much they just have to have a general consensus among the academy that no one is sus on it, and so they won't test it. But there are people within the academy who say it could be a 500, 600 document, 700, 800 even. So they should test it. It's one of the big ones that has absolutely changed the face of the Bible in the last 150 years. So they really need to test this to see if it's genuine, but they won't. Codex Vaticanus, they need to test that as well. They need to test everything. It should just be something, if you're looking at evidence, an evolutionist, does he want more testing done? Does he want more evaluation done? Does he want to put it under the acid test? No, because they've already got their story. They've already got their presuppositions. And so it's only like the flat earth type people who really want to, go that route. And it's like, well, we should just be testing it. We're asking for more information. There's nothing wrong with that. We actually want to do science here. And so we shouldn't be be demonized for wanting more information and not just trusting the scholars on this, because they've been wrong before with archaic mark. And so, yeah, apparently the Dead Sea Scrolls got tested. I was saying that perhaps they weren't tested the other day in a Mark Ward video, but it's great to know this information. 65% or more support the Masoretic text. Were carbon-14 dated, tested just fine. Says Thomas Holland, okay. Quoting Metzger. On the date of Codex Toletanis, I have no right to speak of the textual problems. It's actually very hard to read that, so I won't. Parts go back to an older period, the 10th century. So yeah, it's good to date these things. We're into that. And so, if it's going to cost a bunch of money, perhaps put it to us. Say, it's going to cost $5,000 to do that. I reckon there are people in the Textus Receptus King James community who would go, yeah, cool. We'll lay down that money. I'm sure that there are people out there who would love to see it tested. And the thing is, until it is tested, we're all speculating. Now, I know that there is the Simonides concept and everything like that, and a lot of people gravitate towards that. I tend to gravitate towards that, but I do freely admit that I'm going by faith because I'm just trusting the experts. But most people are just trusting the academy of how old it is. So we should really chemically test it. Then we go, okay, well, this is what it really is. And so
it is really time to put your money where your mouth is and prove it. Now, Latin professor Alexander Salter in.
Okay, so I think what I might do, actually, I'm not sure how much longer this goes for this presentation. It does seem like it goes for quite a long time more. So we're at about the 25-minute mark. So we've gone through quite a lot, but we're actually at 3 hours and 31 minutes. So I know usually I go for 4 or 5 hours, but I think I might pull out. So, okay, so A. Hannah says, you shouldn't ask science to do science to verify their science. Yeah. I mean, haven't we lately seen, do masks work, or, trust the government, that they are the new science. It's like, well, can we get some independent voices on this? No, you're a conspiracy theorist and a racist. It's like, oh, great. It's so ridiculous the way things have ended up. And but I think a lot of people are repelling against that. They're coming out and saying, look, this all that's been happening in the last 10 years with you can't say this about this group and that group. People are just coming out and saying it. People are tired of it. And I think with all the COVID rubbish, a lot of people lost jobs, lost money, especially here in Australia. It was huge. They were locking down whole states because of one case, couldn't go out of your home, and demonizing people who bought toilet paper, So Bible version conspiracy says, at least I'm not a racist. Well, maybe we'll just have to label you one anyway, because, you fit the criteria. But we'll find something else to demonize you about. We'll work it out. I'll make out a list of things that they can say against you. Perhaps you just got toxic masculinity, because everything masculine is toxic. And so I would say that your comment there that you're saying you're not a racist, you're taking the moral high ground, you're actually virtue signaling, you're being passive aggressive and a toxic male. So I'm really sorry to say that to you, Joseph, but you're out of the cool kids club. And anyway, so I'm getting tired. I better go before I say something. But I think it's Joseph. Every time I'm going to end something, he jumps on there. I think he gets excited. And he's like, I'm going to make this continue for another 5 minutes by talking to an Aussie and start joking, because we love to be sarcastic here in Australia. He's like, go to bed. Well, it's actually only 11:27 in the afternoon here. Look, I've got a day off. It's Anzac Day here, where we remember our soldiers here. So go to bed. History document says, thanks, Nick. Well, thanks, guys. I'll do a part 2 when I can. Hopefully that might be before the interview that I do. And so I might just quickly get that back up. Where are we? Okay. Whoops. We've got pages open everywhere. I think I actually shut that page. Yeah, I did. So I won't bring it up. But yeah, looking forward to part 2. Good day, Nick. Yeah, thanks, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.